Hey guys, tonight we step off a low launch into heat that keeps its own calendar. French Guiana's Ile du Salut ahead, Devil's Island a black shoulder to starboard. You aren't a tourist, you're a number with a bowl, a tag and a place in line. We'll test the legends instead of repeating them. How much rock a man moves before his gums loosen? What passes for soup when pepper is a currency? Which island keeps silence as law? Whether the water between here and there is distance or a verdict. We'll count tools, blisters and breaths. We'll meet rules that don't shout because they don't need to. I'll keep jokes short and steps honest. Proof starts immediately. Shaved scalp, canvas that scratches, a pick that wobbles until you seat its wedge, and a road that goes nowhere yet but still demands your back. If you enjoy this kind of misery, hit like and subscribe so the next slog finds you. In the comments, tell me where you're watching from or rate the humidity out of 10. Now square your shoulders, take the spoon, take the tag, and keep your hands open. You're not being soothed, you're being handed a shovel. You stand barefoot on Royale first because the ships drop most men here to sort and sweat before dispersal. A clerk reads your charge while a barber takes your hair to the skin and your scalp burns under sun that likes fresh ground. A doctor presses a cold disc to your chest and writes nothing. He checks your gums and nods at the colour like it's a weather report. A guard with cotton epaulets points you toward a shed where canvas trousers and a light shirt lie in a heap, stiff with salt and old soap. You pull them on and the seams argue with your hips. A tin tag with your number dangles on a cord. It clicks against your collarbone like a patient metronome. You get a hat with a soft brim, a spoon, a bowl, and a place in the line that smells like rope, sweat, iodine and rain. Beyond the sheds, the sea breaks white on black rock and the trees begin. You try to read the paths, but every path looks like a throat. You learn to stand still for orders, and you learn the main rule first. Waiting is also work. Morning isn't a clock here, it's the bell and the smell. You wake with your tongue thick, the air wet enough to chew, and the canvas stuck to your back like a second, worse skin. The bell hits metal and the room becomes shoes, coughs and bowls. Breakfast is a ladle of something that wants to be soup, a palm of cassava, and a cup of black liquid that isn't coffee but pretends hard. You carry your tin outside and swallow, feeling it sit like ballast. Men cough in rows. One cough keeps going until a guard taps his boot with a baton, not angry, just counting. Tools wait in a cart, picks, shovels, baskets, and one wheelbarrow whose wheel is a rumour of roundness. Chains lie coiled, cold and conversational. A trusty calls names and the sun steps onto your shoulders like a man boarding a ferry. You pass the kitchen and catch a sting of smoke, boiled greens and pepper. A gull laughs and steals a rind, and no one cares. The gate opens, the day opens wider. You walk, you lift the pick, and it lifts you back, a seesaw between bone and red stone. The sound is not a ring, but a blunt argument. Iron talking to earth until both agree to give a little. Your palms learn the pattern first. A sting, a smear, then a warm polish you didn't order. Sweat runs into your eyes. You blink. Mud. You shovel chips into a wheelbarrow that steers like a pig, wobbling on a front wheel that has opinions about ruts. The man beside you hums one note without melody. He hums to anchor his breath. You anchor to his hum because the ground gives you nothing back. The foreman watches from the shade of a hat. His ledger grows even when the road does not. A breeze arrives, changes its mind and leaves. Ants find your boot and go exploring. By mid-morning the tool has shaped your hands into bowls that pour heat. You steal a sip and count the swallows. The canteen tastes like iron and old leaves. Your number tag has dulled to grey. You have earned exactly one new fly. At noon you crouch under a timber lean-to that rejects shade the way a sieve rejects water. Lunch is rice that sticks together in forgiving clumps, a hard rind of meat with stories, and a ladle of broth whose main ingredient is heat. You eat quick because mosquitoes know the schedule. They come in feathery swarms, floating like lint until they land with purpose. You slap and smear, your hand smells like iron and sugar. The man who hummed earlier trades you a pinch of salt for a turn at the canteen. He tells you his number and you forget it while he speaks. A guard drifts by and counts shadows. Someone jokes that the island runs on 3 fuels: sweat, cassava and rumour. It gets a small smile and then the flies return to work. You check your hat, tie the cord tighter, and tuck the spoon into your waistband. Gull watches like a clerk. The bell calls again. Your legs disagree but stand anyway. You look at the road, then at the water, then at your hands. Sunscreen would be nice. It is not invented yet. Work resumes, because the day doesn't care about your opinion. The foreman marks progress with chalk and boredom. You carry baskets of broken stone to a new road that leads nowhere yet. A tan ribbon cut from scrub lay course by course like a promise nobody believed when it was spoken. The baskets bite your shoulders and leave raised maps that will fade only when other maps replace them. You plan each step because the path is uneven and the price of a mistake is whatever the nearest rock decides to charge. A rain comes hard and sudden, turning dust to grey paste and men to statues. Steam climbs from the ground like breath from a tired horse. Leeches practice law on your ankles. The cloud passes and the sun laughs without sound. The foreman checks his line of chalk and waves you on. The wheelbarrow sulks, then obeys. Your shirt is glass on your skin. The road still goes nowhere. You go anyway, because the bell will ring again and standing still is a different kind of hurt. By late afternoon, the quarry edge looks chewed, a red bite with teeth marks you recognise as your own. You strike where the foreman points, because guessing wrong costs sweat you can't replace. The pick's head wobbles on its haft. You seat it on a rock and hammer the wedge until the wood swells, a quick repair learned without ceremony. Chips fly and stick to your forearms as if heat were glue. The older convict on your gang keeps time by the sun's angle on a lone palm, raising his chin when shadows shorten past a certain route. He calls you camarade without warmth and shows you how to split a seam by listening. A duller note means the grain will lift if you pry. You pry. It works. The foreman grunts approval that registers as permission. When the basket is full, you hoist, straighten slowly so your lower back doesn't write a complaint you can't erase, and walk the measured path to the tip. There the ground falls away in stone steps down to surf that claps. You dump the load, watch the dust float like bad incense, and go back for another mouthful of the island's patience. The bell grants release and steals it back with roll call. You queue at the gate, bowls tucked like badgers, while a corporal chants numbers into a slate that sweats with the rest of us. One man steps out crooked, favouring a foot that mutinied at noon. He is redirected to the infirmary with the gentleness used on a tool that might still have use. The rest of us file toward the kitchens. Smoke licks the rafters and tears ride it down. Your eyes burn before your spoon touches anything. Dinner is rice that clumps, a cut of meat that pretends it used to run, and a ladle of broth that tastes of bones and rain. There's a slice of cassava that dries your mouth while you chew, a joke in starch form. You sit on a bench polished by hundreds of backsides and swallow until the bowl shows tin. The cook drops a pepper shard in your hand like charity. You suck it for heat and feel almost human for 3 beats. Evening brings inspection. Shirts lifted to show ribs, hands out for counting, backs checked for maps of lash or rot. A sergeant major runs a glance over your boots and taps the toe. You nod as if you planned the scuff. You line your tools by size, edge toward handle, so the guard can read the day without questions. Steel must be oiled, so you rub it with a scrap of greasy cloth that smells like 10 winters. The wheelbarrow gets flipped, the axle scraped with a nail, the bearing coaxed with animal fat from a tin older than your charge. A file goes over the pick until the edge wakes up and remembers its job. You finish by tying the handles together with a single loop, the small flourish of someone who intends to find them again tomorrow. A guard marks your row with chalk. He doesn't look at faces when he can look at objects that answer honestly. Your dorm is a long box with walls that confess heat and a roof that argues with rain. Hammocks hung 3 high sway like slow metronomes, each an island with footsteps underneath. You claim a middle tier by slipping a strip of cloth through the ring and knotting it twice. A knot is a lock when locks are scarce. The man below snores in a rasp that sounds like a saw with a nail in it. The man above whispers his own name before sleep, as if inventory requires his voice. Lice are the true warders, tiny tax collectors who never miss a call. You pinch 2 between thumbnails and wipe them on the beam, leaving proof that doesn't matter. The air smells of canvas, salt, damp rope, and a trace of disinfectant that only convinces itself. A lantern hisses and throws a sick halo that the moths worship until they burn. Someone starts a song under his breath and stops when the guard's boots make a thought in the dust. Night routine is half prayer, half plumbing. You wash at the barrel with a tin cup, throwing water at your face and neck until the salt loosens. The barrel smells like wood and someone else's fear. Soap is rationed and cruel on cracked hands. You use it anyway because tropical sores eat men whole. You check your feet with the seriousness of a banker. Any cut is a loan you will repay with interest. A trustee strolls past with a ledger and a chunk of chalk confirming who occupies which hammock. He notes your number and the knot colour and moves on, already forgetting you. The latrine is a trench with a plank that shifts. You balance like a tightrope walker with nothing to impress. Finish quick, and toss a handful of ash as if ash could argue with smell. You breathe through your mouth on the way back and keep moving. Sleep happens in pieces. You slide into it like a foot into a bad boot. Feel the seams immediately, endure because morning will need you regardless. A rat inspects a bowl on the floor, finds nothing, and leaves the opinion that you failed hospitality. Rain starts with the politeness of distant applause, and arrives as a meeting that could have been shorter. The roof leaks in memorised places, hammocks shift to dodge the drips. Someone coughs out a thread of red and swallows the rest, unwilling to donate drama. You press your tongue to a loose tooth and tell it to behave for one more day. A mosquito sings by your ear like a whetstone and you wave it off without waking fully. When sleep finally holds, it is the kind that forgets your name and only remembers your number. The bell is already waiting on the other side, sharpening its voice. Morning returns with the same argument, and you answer because you don't have a better plan. The bell hacks through canvas and coughs, and your hammock releases you like a reluctant witness. You fold it quick. 2 turns, 1 tuck, because neatness keeps your name off unnecessary lists. The air is grey and already wet. Dawn here doesn't brighten so much as sweat to life. At roll call, a corporal walks the row with a slate and a jaw like a fence post. Tapping boots, counting tags, moving men with a flick that means left gang, right gang, kitchen, quarry, woodcutters. Your number lands with woodcutters. A trustee hands you a machete whose edge remembers better days and a coil of rope that smells like old ships. A rumour drafts the morning. A man from cell block 3 moved to the punishment island after a fight over water. St. Joseph exists like a raised finger in everyone's mind. You breathe, adjust the hat brim, and file toward the gate. The sea flashes between trunks. Gulls argue like clerks late to lunch. Someone behind you mutters about rain. The clouds take the bet and pile higher. March orders push you onto the path that stitches the interior like a rough seam. Trees lean in with shiny leaves that pour water even when the sky holds back. Vines test your ankles, and broad ants parade across the mud with the purpose of engineers. The air stacks odours, sure, crushed fern, warm earth, something animal you won't see, and resin bleeding from fresh cuts. You shoulder the rope and the dull machete that has met too many stones. The trustee leading the gang walks easy in broken sandals, reading the ground the way a clerk reads a ledger line. He points to lianas and tells you to cut them first, or the canopy will snap back and whip a face you might need later. Your first swing meets green and gives back bounce. Your second finds the stringy heart and sings a little. Sap paints your forearms sticky and sweet. Birds fire off notes you can't place. When the path opens onto the stand marked yesterday, the trees seem suddenly older, like witnesses tired of testimony. Sweat has a schedule and you're always late to it. Your shirt turns to glass, your hands to paddles, your breath to steam that refuses to climb. A guard counts swings instead of seconds and calls rest by number, not mercy. Mosquitoes arrive at every pause like auditors, double-checking veins. You rub mud over the bites because that's what the man beside you does, and copying beats inventing. At 10, the rain remembers its job and clocks in hard, drumming leaves, tamping dust and turning your worksite into brown soap. The trusty shows you the notch. Open on the side you want the trunk to kneel. Shallow but honest. No bravado. You chop, switch hands, chop again, edging the mouth wider, while the rain rinses sap from the cut. A wedge from yesterday's offcut slides into the kerf, and you tap it with a pole that has not been polished since France. The tree starts speaking in long fibres, a slow talk you feel in your wrists. You listen because listening beats being surprised. There's a quiet code to hauling that no one writes down. You plant your feet where the ground remembers other heels, grip rope where tar still lives, and lean as if arguing with a cousin. 2 tugs means walk, 1 tug means hold, a long pull means bite your teeth and sing inside. The log chooses a path you did not vote for, bumping roots, levering itself like a lazy crocodile. The guard stays uphill and calls angles. The trusty minds the rope tails so no loop learns your ankle. When the trunk finally kneels, it does so with the gravity of an old soldier, body going where mind already went. The crown crashes through understory, and a smell of smashed green rolls over you, sharp as new soap. You move in with the machete to trim branches, hands careful of hidden thorns and sudden springs of wood. The crosscut comes out for the main cut. 2 men pull with a rhythm that would be music if anyone had spare breath. Sawdust coats your tongue like dry cinnamon. Nobody complains. Complaining wastes air. Meal call scatters through the trees by handbell, and you drift toward it with the others like filings to a magnet. Lunch is rice again, beans for bravery, and a slice of something cured until it forgot its first name. You eat fast because rain stills a minute the way thieves take buttons. A medic passes with a crate of quinine, handing out bitter pellets that promise less fever and deliver arguments with your tongue. You crush the grit and swallow, chasing with water that tastes like the inside of a nail. A rumour rides the benches. A pair from the quarry tried for the mainland in a palm canoe, and the tide handled them like paperwork. Someone says the current writes in circles. Someone else says sharks take the punctuation. You stare through leaves at the smear of surf and decide your shoulders already owe too much to be brave today. The bell calls the second half and the forest closes like a book around a pressed leaf. Afternoon throws its weight and keeps it there. You rotate tasks, chop, haul, wedge, lever, each motion already threaded into the next. When the wedge splits and jumps, it nicks your knuckle and leaves a red bead that the air immediately salts. You clamp it under your other hand until the sting loses interest, then work again because stopping is worse. The guard notes the nick and makes a mark. Later he will remember only the mark. A green snake studies you from a branch and blinks with the patience of a clerk. By late light you're moving a train of trimmed lengths toward the skids, boots slurping at the mud, shoulders buzzing like a hive. On the march back the path skirts a hill with crosses that don't bother to stand straight. No names, just numbers scratched on grey wood. You count them without meaning to, then stop counting for the same reason. No HR, just humidity. Back inside the compound, the infirmary door creaks for a tired line. Men holding their own elbows, as if that helps. The medic's room is a whitewash memory. Shelves with bottles that look like ocean glass and labels running in sweat. You show the knuckle slice and let him swab it with a sting that wakes your teeth. Quinine tablets wait in a jar like chalk bits. He shakes 2 into your palm and watches you swallow, because some men pretend and hide them for trading. He loops a strip of clean cloth, ties a square knot, and tells you to keep it dry in a place that laughs at dry. A man with sailor tattoos stands behind you, forearm chewed by ringworm, and whispers that salt rubbed hard can bully fungus, if you can spare it. He tastes like tobacco and old rope. The medic makes a note on a card that travels between his pocket and a nail, then waves the line along. Outside, the yard blinks white in the heat, and the bell that governs kindness thinks about ringing again. After mess, a box appears on a table under the veranda. Paper, 2 pencils cut to mean fairness, and envelopes that have already travelled more than you will this year. A guard oversees the exchange with the gravity of a banker. You trade your number for a single sheet and sit with your back to a post, translating sweat into sentences you hope will cross the ocean. You start with health, because mothers read that line first. Then you describe work without weight. Then you stop and look at the sea. A trustee walks past with the census stamp, a neat oval that will sit over any sentence that tries to stand up too straight. You write small to make room for everything and end with a promise about conduct you know they want to hear. The pencil snaps. You sharpen it with the pick file and keep going. When you fold the paper, the edges will not meet. You lick the envelope, press until it sticks, and hand the thin hope back across the table. Punishment has a geography here. St. Joseph sits like a raised fist to the east, its cells walled with heat and the rule of silence. Men speak of it without moving their mouths, as if sound could summon it. Closer to us is the Mittard, a stone room with a door that swallows light and a floor that sweats. The sergeant major walks a circle in the yard and stops by the iron collar, lifting it with 2 fingers to show the weight. He doesn't threaten. He reminds. A trustee demonstrates the wrist's chain, palms out, then the ankle irons that encourage careful thinking. Bread and water there do not pretend to be food. Days are counted by chalk and by how fast a man decides to listen. The sergeant major points at the sea and says nothing, which says everything. A gull chooses that moment to scold the yard, and even it sounds cautious. The fever reaches you after lights out, not dramatic, just busy. First it tests your knees, then it borrows your breath in short drafts. Sweat turns cold while the night stays warm, which feels like an administrative error. You curl in the sling and ride waves that have no shore. The man below hears your teeth and passes up a rag he wet at the barrel, telling you to hold it under your tongue until the heat decides to negotiate. The rag tastes like wood and old rope, but you keep it. The lantern on the post grows a halo of moths, and you count their brief circles to keep from counting your own. Somewhere a rat performs a private inventory. Your joints complain in a fine grit, as if sand had learned where hinges live. You sip from the cup and the water tastes like pennies. You breathe, swallow the quinine ghosts, and wait for the tide to turn. Net would be nice. At dawn, the roster gives you kitchen duty, which is mercy disguised as steam. You stand at a bench with a paddle and stir ice until each grain stops shouting. A cauldron gulps water. Smoke climbs, changes its mind, and hangs under the roof beams. A sack of cassava waits for scraping, white curls falling into a tub like shavings from a carpenter's good day. A cook with a chest like a barrel wields pepper authority, flicking seeds that make eyes water and spirits briefly remember home. He keeps a thumbnail scale for fat, dropping dollops into the pot with a precision a jeweller would respect. Now and then he cuffs a hand that lingers too long over the meat bin. You learn to move quick, to rinse the ladles between kettles, and to hand bowls with the lip dry so men believe they have been seen. The floor learns your steps and agrees not to trip you. By afternoon you're back on the Rojang, trading steam for stone. Sleepers come from the woodcutter's slope, squared with an honesty plane and stacked like stubborn books. 4 men to a sleeper, shoulders set, steps agreed before the lift so toes survive. A line of rough rails waits on the ground, dull in the sun, ready to be persuaded into straightness they will forget by next rain. You fetch spikes from a bucket, hand them to the hammerman, and keep fingers flat because the hammer is loyal only to gravity. Fish plates and bolts arrive in a crate with a split side. A wrench travels hand to hand like a rumour. Gauge is measured by a wooden bar shaved to length and painted with numbers that care nothing for weather. When the sledge falls true, the sound carries up the slope and coaxes another swing. You step back, watch the line advance a few breaths, and feel the day click forward by inches. The rail creeps forward in fits, straight only by stubbornness and a wooden gauge that has survived more curses than rain. You carry baskets of laterite to pour between the ties, and a pair of tampers follows, iron feet biting down until the stone tightens like a belt. The hammerman works with a rhythm that persuades more than it punishes. 3 quick taps to set, 1 full swing to finish, and the spike behaves as if civilization were a nail. When the line kinks, the foreman sights along the web and waves the lining bar crew in. They pry, hiss, and heel the whole rail a finger to the left. A bubble level the colour of old gin says good enough. You learn to keep your toes clear of the maul's shadow, to pass spikes head first, and to never stand with your hand on a plate when someone says ready. By late light, the rails meet at a joint and the fish plates kiss. The road is not fast, and it is not pretty, but it is a line that stays where told until the next storm votes. Evening grants a bath not by generosity, but by rule. You line at the cove below the black rocks where surf chews the shore and returns it clean enough for government work. Soap is blue and stubborn. It lathers only if you fight it with sand. You scrub scalp, armpits, then the place's mildew claims first, working fast before the guard decides the ocean needs fewer men. Salt bites every cut with a critique that feels earned. A mate shows you to rub coconut husk on heel and ankle until the dead skin admits defeat. Another swears by a fist of crushed lime leaves and spits out a green foam that smells like medicine, pretending to be a garden. You rinse under a spill of warm runoff, stand into the wind just long enough to stop dripping, and shake the shirt until it forgets yesterday's shape. A fish darts between feet and finds nothing worth eating. Supper lines coil like rope. The ladle moves. Bowls fill. Empty. Return. On a side table sits the canteen's little theatre. Tobacco, a brick of chicory, a twist of pepper, and the luxury of a stubby candle that burns like a paid confession. Prices are written in scrip and favours. You own little of either, yet you trade a spare button and a pencil nub for a mouthful of bitter that convinces itself it is coffee. Men barter quietly, a needle for a patch, a fishhook for 2 matches, news for nothing at all. A trusty keeps count with a slate and a string of beans. When the beans run out, the show ends without apology. You tuck your candle under your hat brim so it keeps dry, then fold the day's aches into a seat and finish the rice that still remembers the pot. No loyalty program. When the yard cools, stories climb out. A Breton with anchor tattoos lists ships he worked and ports that smelled like money. His palms still remember rope the way some men remember faces. A thin Parisian claims he once printed handbills for a strike and learned that ink travels faster than promises. A Corsican stamps a cigarette on the stone and says nothing about knives, which says enough. You listen because the island teaches listening as a trade. Escape plans surface like fish and sinkers quick. A raft of palm trunks, a canoe from a stolen hogshead, a swim at slack tide with a sack of dry cassava tied to the chest. Someone scratches a map with a nail, tracing currents that travel in circles like arguments. The black shoulder of Ile du Diable sits across the cut of water like a held breath. Everyone nods, no one moves. Dawn returns you to stone. The road gang shares tools with the quarry, so you shoulder the long-handled sledge and join the men opening a bluff face that pretends to be polite. 2 mandrills bite a dust-white hole while a third feeds steel and turns it on the half-beat. The sound is bone deep, an auger working inside your chest. A charge man arrives with a leather satchel and his sleepy sticks, voice low as a priest. He seats the primer with the care of a midwife, stems the hole with clay and crushed rock, and lays a fuse that snakes away like a slow idea. The foreman checks the seconds by thumb, draws the gang behind a baffle of stacked timbers, and nods. The fuse hisses its long sentence. Dust breathes. Then the earth coughs once, hard, and the cut steps backward the width of a door. The smell of burnt powder sits close and refuses to leave. Danger is a book everyone can read. A loosened shelf pretends to settle and then slides. The foreman's shout is a hammer. Back! Boots slip. Gravel rolls like dry beans. You pivot, heel digs, shoulder takes the ground so ribs do not, and the sledge jumps from your hands. For a breath, the world edits itself into pieces, red dust, white eyes, the black mouth of the new cut. A man drops to one knee, catches himself on both palms, and swears in a whisper that leaves no fingerprints. Pebbles rattle around the timbers until they decide to rest. The foreman counts heads twice, then 3 times, and the chargeman checks the tamping plug with a stick as if it might answer. No blood today. You pick up the sledge, check the handle for hairline lies, and feel the lesson settle, cheap for once. You return to the face with a careful respect that feels like superstition but is really memory. The foreman changes the order of tasks so loose shells can confess before anyone stands beneath them. You rake the floor clean, shovel to the spoil, then edge back with the long bar to pry suspect flakes. The bar hums when the rock answers honestly. When it lies, it stays mute, and you step away. A cloud passes and the stone cools one temper closer to safe. You and the hammerman trade signals, chin flick for a stop, 2 fingers for ease, palm open for back away. He works the sledging holes while you keep watch on seams that blink. When a featherline starts to wander, you call it, and he knocks the wedges home until the face breathes out a skin of shards. No one thanks anyone. You coil the bar rope, wet your throat, and watch a lizard 3 colours brighter than common sense own a warm ledge. The island teaches hierarchy. Heat first, stone second, men somewhere after tools. Later, the foreman posts 3 of you to the breakwater, a throat of rubble that keeps the cove honest. You push carts down a rail that smells of rust and hot fish, dump loads into the waiting surf, then watch the water argue with the new stones. The sea always wins but accepts delays. A barge brings larger blocks quarried last month. Slings creak, hooks bite, and the derrick groans like a long oath. You guide a stone by hand while the winchman reads your shoulders, lowering until the block kisses its bed and settles with a cough of foam. A sailor in a faded cap trims with a bar, and the tide approves for now. Between hoists you collect splinters from rope that remembers better days, and you spit in your palms because the salt steals what little oil your skin still offers. When the whistle blows, the crew drops hooks in neat loops, and the foreman chalks 2 lines. The cove breathes a little easier, which is more than most men manage here. Work is only half the island. The other half is rules that breed in damp places. The notice goes up. Rations will dock for tools lost, gangs will trade hours if targets slip, and any letter without a return address will sleep in a drawer. You stare at the paper and recognise the handwriting of hunger. A trusty reads it loud for those who cannot, his voice flat as a lid. In the yard, a clerk tallies clothing, 2 shirts per man, 1 mended, and measures belts against a peg because weight here is a ledger that never closes. A brass scale weighs soap to the dram, while a sergeant major checks the list with a finger that has never known lime. When the box of nails goes missing, 3 dorms line against the wall until it returns under a blanket like a shy dog. It does. Everyone breathes once. The man who found it does not remember finding it. Memory edits under pressure. The rules do not. Rain returns like a book you forgot to finish, and the quarry becomes soup with red beans of stone. The gang shifts to cutting drains, narrow runs that convince the water to choose a different sadness. You pick a trench under the face, shovel the slop with a rhythm that keeps it moving, and lay brush to armour the bottom. The smell could brown wood. A tree frog clings to your hat brim and judges. When the sluice opens, the surge tugs at your ankles, cool for 1 breath, and then just heavy. The foreman sends 2 men to sandbag the haul road. You join them with sacks that drink faster than you can feed them. You stack a crooked wall that still improves the world by 1 inch. The rain quits as if a clerk closed a window. Steam climbs and the frogs exchange notes on management. You wring your shirt, succeed a little, and shoulder the shovel again. Drains are never done. They only pause. That night the dawn becomes a chorus of throats and dreams. Fever climbs your neighbour like ivy, and you ladle water into his mouth while he says the names of streets as if ordering bread. The medic stops, checks his pulse with 2 fingers that have seen everything, and leaves powders in a paper that dissolves if forgotten on the tongue. You wipe the man's chest with a rag dipped in the barrel, because coolness is a language even heat respects. Across the room, someone mutters to a saint who never travelled this far west. The saint listens without hope or dislike. Listening costs nothing yet. When the bell of rounds rattles the corridor hammock still, and the guard looks in as if counting furniture, a breeze steals under the eaves, touches your face, and decides it can do no real good. You sleep sitting up for a while, then let the sling take you, because tomorrow isn't interested in your opinions. The fever man's breath evens. You keep the cup close. Dawn assigns you to the sawpit, which is a hole with ambition. A squared trunk lies across the trench on trestles, and you take the pitman end because no one volunteers for the top. The two-man saw is a polite tyrant. Downstroke bites, upstroke clears, and teeth spit out a lace of pale curls that taste like pennies when they land in your mouth. The topman steadies the line with chalk and string, calling hold when the kerf threatens wander. Your world becomes falling powder creek, and the satisfaction of a straight ribbon appearing where there was none. Every dozen strokes you switch hands so wrists last until noon. Sweat rains into the trench and turns sawdust to a cake that tries to collect your ankles. A dog from the kitchens watches with the impartial concern of a minor official. When the cut finally drops open, the plank lists on its props and you both step back together. The grain shines, tight as small writing. Somebody will walk on this and never know you. The plank you helped birth at the sawpit travels to the carpentry shed the way an idea travels to a conclusion. Pulled, steadied is the argued into use. You meet it again across trestles, plain set fine enough to lift ribbons that curl like fish skin. The foreman marks lengths with a carpenter's rule that has forgotten France but remembers numbers. You shave high spots, check the square, and oil the blade with a rag that knows too many jobs. Nails live in a dented tin. You count them out like coins and guard each one with your life. Hinges squeal and then agree to cooperate after a drop of fat. The lid fits when you stop insisting on perfection and accept straight enough. A brush drags thin oil over the grain until the pine glows like a quiet lamp. A number gets stenciled in black, steady as a verdict. You don't ask what the box is for. The island answers anyway when a cart creaks past with a sheeted shape that doesn't weigh much. You set the brush down and sharpen the plane again. Sunday pretends to be gentler and fails, though it changes the tasks. Laundry lines web the yard like new borders, shirts snap, trousers drip, and the sun signs them dry without reading. You stand over a tub with ash and soap, working cloth until the water greys and the fabric gives up. Mending hour follows, needles pass, thread bites, buttons pick new loyalties. Chapel call rings, and you file into a room that smells of wax and rope. Benches close so knees learn diplomacy. A priest with salt in his hair lifts a voice that once belonged to winter churches. Here it sounds like someone watering dust. He speaks of patience, as if it were bread. After the amen, the canteen opens briefly for tobacco, the colour of old rope, a twist of pepper, and candles that burn like paid confessions. Letters get called from a box that looks too small for hope. A few arrive with black bars where sentences tried to stand up. You pocket silence and answer later. At dusk, the island smokes on purpose. Drums of damp leaves and husks cough along the paths, feeding mosquitoes a meal of bad air. The medic walks the line with quinine and a stare that has measured too many fevers. He chalks doorposts to show which dorms swallowed doses and which tried to bargain. Nets appear over a few bunks like small tents or with holes big enough for hope to pass through. You rub ankles with kerosene thinned in kitchen fat, then hate the smell less than the itch. A trusty swears by smearing ash in the crook of the elbow. He looks bitten anyway. Someone lights a smudge near the latrine, and the smoke leans over the trench like a tired clerk. The horizon darkens into a thin iron bar, and wind finds your shirt, lifts it, sets it back. A bat dips through the smoke and vanishes toward the grove. You spit the bitterness of quinine, rinse with water that tastes like pennies. and lie down grateful for a net that teaches politeness to wings. Weather steps in without a knock. A squall shoulders the cove, flips the neat buckets by the pump, and turns the Hall Road to a red ribbon that unravels. The bell hammers once, and the repair gang moves as if the island had rehearsed you for this. You lash tarps over the timber stack, drive pegs where the wind would prefer arguments, and run a safety line from the derrick to the winch post so the mast doesn't practice falling. Lightning cuffs a palm on the ridge and leaves it smoking like a scalded chimney. Rain hits sideways. You blink salt fresh from your own face. Balers pass like a bucket brigade made of elbows and bad words. In the yard, a roof sheet lifts, thinks better of it, and settles after 3 men ride it down like a stubborn mule. The squall decides it has said enough and walks out to sea without apology. Steam rises from everything. You coil the rope wet and heavy as a promise and feel the island breathe again. The coconut sheds warm after rain, kilns breathing their slow sweet rot. You split husks on a steel spike, twist out meat for the racks, and lay crescents to dry until they stop pretending to be fruit and become copra. The smell lives between bakery and barn. Rats test the posts and meet tin collars greased with whatever the kitchen lends. They drop back and reconsider life. 2 men twist coir on their thighs, rolling husk fibre until brown rope appears that will hold a boat or a man's temper. A boy-faced convict steps wrong and drives a husk spine into his heel. You flood it with salt water, bite his strap, and pry it out like a nail that didn't sign the contract. He thanks you with the silence of someone who might cry if words start. In the corner a scale weighs sacks, and chalk on the wall turns kilos into numbers the foreman can report upward. You scratch your ankle and promise not to. Night muster gathers everyone into a rectangle that breathes. The sergeant major reads dispositions. Work gangs for morning, infirmary visits, punishments peeled, and punishments confirmed. He speaks the word doublage, and the yard tightens. Sentences that end only to become exile. Years that finish, and then continue on these shores like a second shadow. A few men study the dark run of water between here and Ile du Diable, measuring distance the way a starving man measures bread. A trusty mentions a gap in patrols, a lull at the tide, a cove that looks like permission. Later he will forget he said any of it. The roll closes, the chalk squeaks a line and boots turn away. In the dorm you light the stub of your candle, write 3 careful sentences that promise conduct and omit hunger, then stop because the pencil shrank and your hand shakes. Outside, the sea keeps its own count. Inside, a rat taps the beam and finds nothing to argue with. Infirmary runner isn't a promotion, it's sweat with manners. You fetch buckets from the boiler, where water trembles like a frightened horse, carry them careful so Skull doesn't ask for your name, and line tins beside cots that count ribs in multiples. Fever reads faces the way clerks read ledgers, fast, without sympathy. The medic presses a thermometer like a thin priest under tongues, squints, nods, and writes a number that becomes your whole weather. Bowls hold rice pretending to be medicine. Quinine arrives as white pebbles that skitter from damp fingers. Ulcers bloom under bandages that used to be shirts. One man's legs shine with the varnish of yours. Another guards his belly from cramps that argue loud enough for neighbours to answer. You wring cloth into coolness and learn wrist pulses as if they were door knocks. Slow means maybe. Rapid means soon. The smell is iodine, old sweat, and the sweet sour of tropical sores too patient to leave. A gecko owns the rafters and eats tiny nurses with wings. You keep moving. Stopping invites inventory. A man returns from St. Joseph and carries silence like contraband. He sits, drinks water as if each swallow needs permission, and shows wrists thin as broom handles. The rule there is quiet, he says, not as advice, but as gravity. Bread and water live on a schedule that never learns your hunger. Light comes through a slit that moves like a blade from wall to wall. Irons teach ankles to think before they turn. He counts days by chalk until the chalk goes soft. Then he counts by drips from a ceiling that sweats even at night. When a guard speaks, it sounds like a door closing. He says you learn every nail of your cell by feel, and when you return to air, the sky looks false, too wide to accept. Someone asks if he dreamed escape. He says no, dreams they'll wear the uniform too. He lies down on the bench, sleeps without choosing to, and wakes already apologising to the sun. Trusties move through the yard like lowercase letters, seen, not discussed. Some are liberes, sentence done in theory, chained to the colony by doublage that folds a life in half and calls it even. They carry keys, count bowls, trade news between offices that pretend not to listen. A few keep the canteen shed, selling pepper twists and tobacco bricks, soap shaved thin as excuses, and matches that could buy a favour if favours were real currency. You watch how they talk to guards, eyes down, tone neutral, a grammar that never risked adjectives. One runs a skiff to the mainland dock, bringing back sacks that smell of salt, dried fish, and French paper that will outlive many of us. In the evenings they sit a little apart, stitching soles, writing letters for men whose hands shake, adding numbers on a slate with a piece of bone because chalk runs out. Freedom here is a direction, not a door. In the smithy the island remembers metal. Charcoal breathes a dull red. Bellows wheeze like old lungs that refuse to retire. You hold the long tongs while the blacksmith draws a pick head from the fire, scale spritzing like rain in reverse. He sets it on the anvil, and the striker's sledge drops with practised mercy. Two light, one heavy, then the edge stretches obedient as dough. The horn takes a curve from a chain link that learned to lie. The punch opens an eye for a shackle that will never blink. Quench stinks of iron, fish, and everything else that died under this roof. The blacksmith trims a nail to a true pyramid and taps it along the ruler's marks, making teeth for a new saw like he's setting a hymn. When he hands you the pick, the edge glints with a promise better than most human ones. You oil it with a rag and thank the tool because tools answer. Night walks the shore with small lights. Plankton spark in breakers where black water shears white, a row of tiny stars that refuse all orders and make their own show. A guard on rounds drags chain as if to teach gravel a lesson. It hisses and falls quiet. You stand at the rail for a breath longer than allowed and listen to the surf argue with rock until both are satisfied. Wind moves in the almond trees and drops leaves shaped like dull knives. Far out, a lantern nods on a fishing skiff you will never ride. A shark writes a dark parenthesis just outside the glow and closes it without comment. In the dorm, hammocks sway in their slow alphabet. The fever man sleeps flat. Finally. You check your cup, find a moth, tip it gently to the floor like returning a coin. The bell for silence is late, then early. Time here studies other subjects. Your sandal gives up by morning, so you appoint yourself cobbler. Coir rope from the copra shed becomes thread. A kitchen bone turns file soft into a needle that pierces leather if you ask with both hands. You punch holes with a nail heated in the smithy's cough, stitch crosswise, then lay a patch from a dead man's strap because the living borrow what stays. A dab of tallow persuades the knots to mind their work. You wrap the heel with a strip of canvas so grit won't soil your skin and test the fit, rocking heel to toe until the sole agrees to stay. The result looks like a confession, but holds. The guard glances, says nothing, and moves on because functioning items answer most questions. You tuck the bone needle in your hatband, coil the coir, and stand. The day waits with its usual patience. The road waits too, not impressed, not offended, just there. Work detail posts you to the lime kiln, a circular mouth eating coral and shells until they glow, then cool to powder that stings lungs and sweetens mortar. You wheel baskets from the shore where wave-polished fragments lie like teeth, shovel them into the kiln's throat, and step back from heat that feels personal. The stoker reads colour, not clocks. When stone turns sugar white, he drags it out with an iron rake that vibrates your wrists just by watching. Slake tubs wait with water brimming to the lip. You tip the fresh lime in and leap back as it hisses, swells and spits, a small volcano that settles into cream the builders call milk. Your face tingles where Flex landed. Your shirt smokes a little and decides to forgive you. By noon, a pyramid of sacks rises, chalked with numbers and sweat. Later, the mortar will pin stones together on a wall no one loves. Today, the best you can say is that it holds. You stand in the shade of the kiln's low roof and rinse your eyes with water that tastes like shells, grateful your eyebrows still exist. Market day for warders means errands for you. You shoulder crates to the dock, saltfish, rope, a sack of coffee that will live in officers' cups, and wait beside a launch that nods in the swell. The mainland sits across water like a rumour you can smell. Tar, fruit and sweat that belongs to people who go home at night. A clerk checks lists twice, not to be sure, but because checking is comfort. While you wait, a fisherman in a patched hat slides close and speaks without lips moving. Dried mango for a file, a fishing hook for pepper, a scrap of sail for anything that writes. You keep your eyes on the rope bitters and say nothing with your hands. A guard studies reflections, not faces, and the fisherman peels away, polite as tide leaving rock. The launch coughs, takes the crates, and returns emptier. You inhale the town's noise and let it go. It is not for you yet, maybe not ever. The library is a shelf behind a door that sticks, books older than the iron that holds them. You sign a number, not a name, and carry out volumes that forgot the tropics were coming. Damp-ruffled Balzac, a warped atlas, a catechism with notes that argue kindly in the margins. You open the atlas flat and let the paper dry in light that slides through the louvers. Continents relax under your fingers like beasts that might yet forgive. A guard pretends not to care as long as pages return. You take turns reading aloud in the dorm, trading paragraphs for the price of 2 stitches or a sharpened pick. Men nap with worlds open on their chests. When the light fails, the atlas closes on your thumb for a breath, and you feel the spine thrum like a small heart. You put it back because keeping things here is a promise you cannot afford to break. Bathing becomes a ritual you could perform in the dark. Barrel, tin, scrape, splash, wipe, repeat, then a pinch of ash in the armpit to convince skin to behave. On good weeks, the sea counts as clean. On bad ones, the runoff turns the cove to soup and you wait for a clearer tide. You learn to wash clothes in order. Soak, punch, roll on the plank, rinse, twist, shake, and to knot them high where rats can't vote. Laundry Talk is the island's newspaper. Men trade recipes for keeping cloth from rotting. A spoon of lime in the final rinse. Vinegar begged from the kitchen. Sunlight angled like a cure. Someone claims boiled papaya leaf beats soap. You try it once, decide it is truth adjacent, and go back to the blue brick that fights like a mule. No detergent pods, just elbows. You carve clothespins from offcuts, wedge them with slivers, and guard the line like treasure when a squall shoulders the ridge. The day smells of soap and sunburn. For an hour you almost feel clean. Discipline drills in small ways. A spoon unpolished earns latrine duty. A missed button buys you a morning of hauling buckets until your shoulders hum. You adapt. Before muster you rub the spoon on your canvas until it answers with a dull shine. You sew buttons standing proud so thread lives longer. You learn the sergeant major's path and keep not in it, the way rain skirts a rock. When a fight flares, 2 men, 1 piece of bread, the yard freezes, then melts as guards arrive, swinging certainty. Later both men lift stones until their arms forget their names. You loan one a thimble you made from a bullet case and he nods once, which counts as a treaty. By lights out, the yard has swallowed the story and moved on. You brush your boots with coconut oil because polish is a rumour. Square your blanket to the plank so corners agree on being corners, and keep your tag cord mended so no one has a reason to say your number twice. The lesson isn't fear, it's friction management. A rumour returns wearing new boots. A man swam at slack and reached a log, drifted between islands, and found a current shaped like permission. The story grows fins. Some say he used goat skins for float. Some say he greased himself like a wrestler. One swears he confessed to a priest down to the last nail before stepping into black water. You go to the rail and measure the chop with your eyes. The cut glares back. You picture your arms turning to rope, your lungs to wet sacks, your legs to ballast. Then you picture the sharks that draw punctuation where they please. You step away because wanting isn't planning, and planning here includes the tide table, a moon, and luck that doesn't know your name. The bell rings. You shoulder the pick. The island waits without comment. You count guard lanterns the way sailors count bells and learn the shallow hour when patrols thin. Knowledge arrives, sits beside courage, and refuses to shake hands. For now, you keep both and do nothing. Bread comes from the island the way forgiveness sometimes does. Slow, hot, and never enough. You draw bakery duty and find the room already bright with ash, bricks glowing like banked planets. The head baker cocks an eyebrow and points with his peel. You mind the sponge, a grey lump that smells sour and alive. Water, salt, flour, and a ladle of yesterday's temper become a paste that clings to knuckles and argues with wrists. You work it until it answers, fold, push, quarter turn, breathe, repeat. Then let it rest under damp cloth that smells of soap and smoke. Proofed loaves rise like stubborn lungs. The baker cuts ears with a razor that used to shave a jaw, then slides the rounds onto the hearth with a practiced flick. Heat licks forearms, hair curls and gives up. You watch crust bloom from pale to brown to almost too much, and he reads the bottoms with 2 taps that sound like a polite door. Rations get stamped, heels set aside for the officers. The baker breaks one heel and passes you a burnt kiss of crust. For 3 slow chews, you remember France. You learn the island's small animals the way a shop boy learns regulars. Goats complain from a rocky pen and eat with an indignation that feels personal. Chickens peck in the yard, turning spilled rice into eggs that move like currency. A pig lives behind the kitchen, an accountant in bristles, converting peelings into future feasts you will not be invited to. You haul water from the cistern and top the troughs, slipping only once because algae prefers sarcasm to grip. The keeper, a trusty with quiet bones, shows you the rope halter trick that convinces a goat to walk somewhere it would rather insult. You sweep feed into corners to starve rats of courage. When a hen goes broody in the tool rack, you rig a little fence from slats and a broken fish plate, and the guard who finds it nods once instead of writing. A rooster watches all of it with the steady dislike of a minor official. You keep your hands honest. Pecking comes fast. Mail arrives when it wants and leaves when it is ready. The launch coughs up a bag with a rope seal, and the clerk opens it like a slow present. Names get called for free men, numbers get called for the rest. You stand when your sounds fill your ribs move. The envelope travelled through more dry rooms than you'll see this year. Inside is cramped handwriting that smells faintly of ink and flour. Your sister lists small weather, asks after your health, and mentions a neighbour's cart that finally died in the hill lane. She includes a pressed leaf that survived the censors because it says nothing. You lean against a post and read twice, then write back on the table under the veranda. You are working, you are steady. You are eating, you will behave. You do not say hungry, you do not say fever. You add a line about a gull that steals soap like it understands jokes. The trustee stamps your page, and the oval blue mark sits there like a lid on a pot. The punishment yard teaches arithmetic. 2 iron balls sit on a bench like arguments. A third waits chained to a ring set in stone. A man we know only has 457 shoulders, 1 with slow care, walks the marked lane, turns, and walks back. No one hurries him. Each length is a number owed, and the debt shrinks only while his feet move. The guard watches with a gaze that counts without malice, the way tides count hours. You oil a hinge on the gate and keep distance, aware that silence here is contagious. When the ball slips, 457 squats, breath steady, and rolls it back to his thigh with both poems. He says nothing because words would be extra weight. At the end of the set, he wipes the iron with a rag, leaves it cleaner than he found it, and nods to air as if paying it a till. The lane keeps its chalk. The lesson keeps you. Work details braid with odd tasks. Today you carry a flagstone to the cemetery knoll, where crosses lean like tired men. The grave crew opens a neat oval, edges firmed with boards so the walls don't dissolve. The box you planned last week waits under a sheet. The number on the lid matches the one on the slate. No priest, just a hatless guard who understands quiet. 4 chords lower, knots pay out, and the weight settles with a soft finality that never gets easier to hear. Dirt returns in orderly lifts, tamped with the flat of a shovel so the mound won't sink like a careless promise. Someone lays a strip of torn shirt on the fresh soil. Someone else pushes it deeper with 2 fingers, the way you tuck hair behind an ear. A gull calls once and stops. The guard makes a mark in his book and we shoulder tools. On the walk down, boots scuff red dust that already forgets our names. Numbers stay longer than faces. Evening classes begin because a guard's wife sent primers in a crate that once held olives. A scripture reader teaches letters to men who never met their own names on paper. You trace lines with a stick on a sanded board until shapes stop lying. A Breton shows numbers using beans and nails to explain borrowing and the mercy of 0. You sound words out of the catechism, not for piety but for practice, and feel your mouth relearn patience. The atlas returns and the room leans over it, fingers travelling rivers like remembered veins. Someone finds Cayenne and draws a breath. Someone else finds Paris and forgets to. A mosquito whines and you swat air without malice. When the lantern gutters, the reader closes his book with 2 hands, as if easing a lid. The men thank him softly because thanks is still a usable tool. Outside, waves polish the same rocks again. Inside, the chalk waits for tomorrow's letters like a quiet promise. Ration day arrives with a clipboard and a mood. You form 2 lines under the veranda, bowls tucked, sacks folded flat under your arm as if that changes how much will fit. A clerk sings the numbers. A trustee measures rice with a dented cup that has seen more hands than any priest. Salt meat comes as rectangles that remember animals only by smell. He weighs each piece on a brass scale that sticks at certain truths. Cassava flour clouds the air and lands on shoulders like pale approval. Sugar is a spoon if you behaved, a half if someone wearing a stripe decided you didn't. The pepper jar travels carefully, a red planet in a small orbit. Soap bricks are sliced thin and wrapped in paper that can be read again later for comfort. You tuck 2 onions into your sack and feel suddenly wealthy. A guard notes who trades portions for tobacco and who hides a handful under the hat brim for midnight. You do neither. You cinch the sack with a strip of coir and carry it like a small future, careful as a lantern in wind. The wall gang needs mortar and patience. You shoulder a hod of lime milk and sand until your shirt shoulders it to, and you climb the scaffold with steps you memorised the second you decided not to fall today. The mason's trowel moves like a small boat. Load, spread, feather, and the block drops with a thud that decides arguments. You tap the corners until the joint closes, and the line snaps chalk across your knuckles like a signature. Plumb, bob, level, twine. Repeat. The foreman sights along the run and grunts when the course behaves. Mortar bites into cuts with lemon honesty. You learn to work smoother, to keep edges clean so rain won't write its own edits. A lad below shovels mix and hums a tune from a city he won't name. By noon the wall has climbed a man's height, and the scaffold tilts toward faith. You tie off the bucket rope with a bowlina you would trust with your life. Sunday shave is a ceremony with rationed blades. The barber's bench is a plank under a slat of shade, and men queue with towels over shoulders like penitent swimmers. He knots a sheet around your chest, touches your jaw with fingers that smell of alum and soap, and strops the razor on a strap as thin as patience. Water warms in a kettle that never quite boils. Lather foams in a chipped bowl and climbs your cheeks like slow weather. He draws the blade with care around scars you stop naming, flicks the soap at flies, then presses alum to the nicks until your skin sings complaint and quiet. He trims hair to regulation that is mostly wishful thinking, and combs lice into a basin with the professional indifference of a clerk. When he's done, you feel wind again. For 3 breaths the island seems cut narrower, your face lighter, your eyes almost your own. After lights out, quiet has a different definition. A circle forms around a board scratched with squares. Dominoes cut from coconut shell clack and whisper. Pieces are notched so fingers can read what eyes miss in a low light. Steaks are tobacco crumbs, a chili, a favour next week when favours breed. You lean on an elbow and watch hands, not faces. Bluff lives in knuckles more than eyes when men are this tired. Someone carves a new tile with a fishbone needle and a match scrape. Slow, exacting. A joke about the foreman's hat lands, soft as a spoon. A boot thumps from the corridor and the circle stills. Pieces stack themselves like good soldiers until the steps pass. Play resumes. A 6 meets a 6 and the whole dorm breathes through its nose, pleased. You pass on a risky tile and save the favour. No one wins much. Winning draws eyes you don't need. A moth drowns in the lamp and is rescued with a spoon. Midweek, a man in your gang tries to bend the island's tension. On the march back from the quarry, he drops half a pace, steps into brush that looks like brush, and kneels as if to retie a lace. His hand slides a tin under a root. A canteen for a later night when tide tables align with courage. Ants find him first. The guard farther up the file doesn't shout. He adjusts his cap and the file halts 2 breaths later, as if the ground itself had asked. The trustee retrieves the tin and hands it back to the man without comment. The guard writes nothing. He finishes the march without changing the count. At roll call, the sergeant major names no one, and holds up a tin canteen with a dent in its side. He taps it once on his palm. The sound is a small bell. You understand the island has more eyes than trees. Night brings a long, even ache that belongs to no one else. You roll the day like a coin between fingers, mortar line that held, the barber's sure wrist, the slip of a gecko's tail, the clack of 2 good 6s meeting on coconut shell. Salt dries in your eyebrows, your shirt finally stops pretending to be wet. Across the water, Ile du Diable lies dark and close, a black shoulder you could almost touch, the way memory is close when it wants to be cruel. You think of a kitchen at home, a window that opened on rain, the clatter of plates that meant a meal made room for you. Here, sleep makes room when it wants. You turn on your side, ease one knee, and let the hammock remember your shape. The bell waits behind the dark like a word you already know. Somewhere a rat tests a beam and changes its mind. Before dawn you're sent to the tide wall with a shovel, and a man who knows the moon like a paymaster. He taps the wet mark on stone and tells you what it meant last night, what it will try at noon, and when patrols grow bored enough to blink. He's not planning anything, he says, which is the same as planning everything. You move silt from the sluice lip and stack it low so the next surge will take it and not the roadway. The wall keeps its moss. Crabs work sideways like petty officials. He shows you the channel where the ebb runs faster by a handspan, and the seam where backwash curls like rope. You learn the feel of a shoal through the shovel's handle, the way grit lightens when water does the work. A patrol launch chimes once beyond the headland, then thinks better of boasting. When the sun shoulders up, he nods at the stain creeping down the wall and says the hour you wanted just left. You shoulder the shovel and accept that wanting is not a schedule here, only a compass you keep hidden. Brickwork swallows the morning. Laterite baked in sun numbs turns from red butter to stubborn loaves, and you ferry them to the kiln mouth where yesterday's fire still remembers its job. A stack grows with shy gaps for air. The stoker lays kindling like a careful lie and coaxes flame until the face glows dull as old copper. You mix a slip of lime milk and clay that dries to a chalk meant to keep rain outside for one season more than men expected. The mason's plum mutters truth. You answer with your back. A brick shears and must be culled. Tap and listen for the dead note, the sound that says it will betray mortar after the first hard storm. Hands white to the wrist, you butter, place and squeeze until the joint closes and the line reads straight from knee to eye. At break you scrape grit from your teeth and drink water that tastes faintly of shells and smoke. By noon the wall's shadow finally matters. You step into it, roll your shoulders, and feel the island admit a narrow kindness. Food becomes a side project that might keep you honest tomorrow. You set fish traps from split cane in a creek that pretends to forget the sea. Bait is coconut meat and optimism. Crabs test your toes at dusk, and you teach them boundaries with a stick you carry like a polite threat. In the kitchen yard, you char eggplants bartered from a guard who found a friend in pepper. Their skins blister, the flesh turns smoky sweet, and a spoon of lime wakes it like a whistle. Rice steals that flavour and acts rich for once. An old hand shows you to grill cassava thin on a hot plate so it becomes a crisp that cracks like good news. When someone snags a jack from the rocks with a line made of coir and nerve, the cook steams it in banana leaves and the yard smells briefly like a harbour pretending to be a home. You eat slow, guarding the bowl with an elbow that learned manners in other rooms. Small mercies breed in odd corners. The Breton teaches you a sailor's splice and your rope stops confiding its plans to unravel. In exchange, you write 2 sentences to his girl that he dictates like a man building a dinghy, slow, straight with room for weather. The fever man, steadier now, shows you how to crush guava leaves to clean a scrape. The smell is a garden auditioning for sainthood. You copy his knot for tying a rag across the nose when lime fumes boss the air, and you double that knot on your hammock ring so sleep doesn't drop you mid-dream. At evening class, you trade a smooth pebble for a pencil stub and copy letters onto a board sanded clean, tracing curves until they stop arguing. The catechism gives you practice words you do not believe but can sound, and the atlas opens again like a door that occasionally forgets to lock. Punishment still keeps its own calendar. A man from the quarry files late to muster and earns the post, wrists looped high to a beam that makes time longer. No display, no sermon, just a guard who checks the knots for safety and leaves him to learn stillness. You pass twice with buckets and do not spill. His lips have stopped arguing with thirst. When the guard returns, he loosens the cords with the care of a farrier. Purple bands fade slowly, and the man nods once, proud he didn't speak. The yard remembers and forgets at the same time. Another day the mitard accepts 2 for whispering at the fence, each given bread that has forgotten water, and water that has forgotten kindness. You carry the bucket there and do not meet eyes because eyes carry words back out. On Saint Joseph the rule is silence so deep the walls learn it. Men come back blinking at noise like walkers stepping out of fog. Night grants a sky that can almost afford stars. You walk the rail by the cove and count constellations you heard once as a boy, then rename them to fit this place. The pick, the spoon, the rope, the palm phosphorescence writes cursive at your ankles where small breakers fold. Across the cut, Ile du Diable wears its dark like a habit, and a single lantern there answers once, then goes away. A small breeze slips from the trees and smells of sap and tar. It dries the last salt on your temples and moves on, uninterested in opinions. The guard's steps fade along the path like a pencil rubbing over old letters. You think about not vanishing, about leaving a mark that is more than a number on a plank, and decide marks are just chores with longer patience. You scratch a small line on the railhead anyway, a private tally no one will read, then listen to bats stitch the air above the cove until sleep comes close enough to tap your shoulder. No streetlights, just water and whatever glows. Hammock day means boiling what holds you. You draw the copper to the yard, feed it split palm, and make lie by sluicing ash through a rag until the drip bites your cuticles. Hammocks unhook and drop like shed skins. Nets come down with them, full of apologies and the small dead. You plunge canvas, stir with a paddle, and watch lice float like pale punctuation that the boiler raises. Ropes get scrubbed on the washboard, twisted tight, then shocked in seawater because salt remembers how to argue with rot. Needles travel, patches from retired shirts find new work on corners that fray. You re-whip your hammock rings with coir so the cord stops soaring. The line runs between two almond trees and groans under the weight of clean. Sun presses wrinkles flat better than any iron. A guard passes, checks knots, and pretends not to inhale the rare smell of soap. No bug spray, only smoke. By dusk your sling is dry enough to claim, familiar as a bruise, and you knot the net with an extra inch of hope. The mangrove crew shows you work that moves while you stand. Roots tangle like hands. You cut them where they surrender, then lay corduroy of poles across ooze that would like to own your boots. Each step needs a test with a stick. Each stick needs a wrist that remembers yesterday's depth. Crabs complain and sink, then pop up elsewhere to renew their case. Leeches ride water like accountants and bill everyone. The foreman assigns signals simple enough for Mud to understand. One arm up means plank, both arms means lift. A flat palm low means do not learn to swim today. You ferry bundles along a path that changes its mind every hour. When a plank disappears, you mark the spot with a branch because men forget what the mangrove never does. By noon your legs wear a grey sheen, your hands wear nicked you will meet again at night, and the new causeway reaches one pace farther toward a shore that refuses to admit distance. Stormlight at evening makes every edge louder. The sky floats green, then leans to iron. Palms crack their knuckles and the cove turns to hammered tin. You tie what can be tied, know what can't, and lay tools where water won't steal them first. Rain arrives like a verdict. The roof chatters, the gutters fill and fail, the path reconsiders its duties and joins the creek. You stand under the eave and watch the tide reach for the new mangrove causeway and not quite get it. Phosphorescence wakes inside the rain where it hits the dark water. Tiny fires punching in and out like fish breathing. A guard on rounds pulls his cape, bows to the weather, and keeps walking because walking is the only power anyone has here. The squall spends itself and leaves everything cleaner except men. You unhook your hammock once to shake the drip from the net, lie back in the damp that passes for comfort, and let the fan of the surf try its small lullaby on stubborn ears. At first light you're posted to the oil shed where nuts become patience. Yesterday's coconuts, split and dried, rattle in a crate that smells of smoke and salt. You crack shells with a mallet on a stump polished by years of wrong knuckles, pry meat with a curved knife, and feed white crescents to the grinder. The handle turns hard, teeth complain, and a pale mash falls in ropes to a pan. A brazier keeps the press warm. Iron sweats and creaks as the screw comes down. Oil crawls from the spout, slow gold that will find lamps, pans, and straps that squeak. You skim fibre with a slotted spoon, toss the cake to dry for animal feed or tomorrow's fire, and wipe the rim so grit doesn't lie to the measure. The foreman counts yields by cups and frowns at wind. You keep turning. The shed's light is soft as flour. Outside, gulls argue over a peel. Inside, the press keeps its steady sermon and the day accepts it. Shaping happens on a board you oil with marrow from a tin. The mould drops, the slurry spreads, and you strike the top with a stick until it smooths and forgets the hand that made it. Two men lift at the handles and the newborn brick slides out heavy. Edges still deciding if they want to be edges. You set the pair gently under a thatch lean-to, where shade pretends to be mercy, and move the mould again. The rhythm builds. Pour. Strike, lift, set, step, breathe. A boy with a pail sprinkles water so skins don't form and trap weakness. The guard counts without my, bliss, tapping a tally into a slate with the end of a nail, and reminds you to keep sand on the board so the clay learns manners. By midday a field of red loaves sits in neat ranks, each holding your thumbprint somewhere soft. Quality control is a hat and a stare. Rest gets measured in sips and a wedge of lime the cook traded for 2 nails. You suck it until your jaw complains, hoping a sour mouth might argue scurvy into leaving your gums alone. Quinine follows, the same chalky moons that teach tongues humility. You crush them and chase with water that tasted better when you blessed it by guessing. A mosquito drills through the cuff and finds your wrist. You smear it to paste and rinse with a handful of mud because that works as well as anything, which is to say briefly. A mate shows you his sun kettle, 2 bottles wired together, dark cloth wrapped, set in a tray of water, and swears it makes tea if you wait an hour. You nod and let hope live somewhere small. No thermos, just sunlight. The bell claims the moment back and you step into the pit with a sigh that belongs to everyone. Tools demand their own shift. After the moulds are set for the afternoon dry, you shoulder the dead wheelbarrow that bucked all morning and roll it to the shed where iron remembers shapes. The axle wore a groove like a bad habit. You drift the wheel off with a pin and a prayer, file the scar until truth shows, and pack the bearing with tallow and grit, because grease is scarce and grit obeys when wet. The rim needs 6 nails. You punch pilot holes with a heated awl, set the nails, and pin their heads until silver spreads like a coin. A new handle comes from a length of heartwood shaved true. You burn the socket with a hot tenon to seat it honest, then wedge cross-grain so the day can't pull it free. The barrow sits upright, decides to behave, and rolls smooth enough to make your shoulder believe it will still belong to you next week. Tools answer when you speak plain. Supper is thin stew that improves when someone finds 2 limes and the cook lets you squeeze them. You share the bowl with the fever man because his mouth has learned bitterness and needs reminding of other flavours. A Breton breaks a heel of bread and salts it for both of you. Nobody asks where he got the salt. The dorm's dominoes click in their quiet grammar. You mend a strap by candle and pay the man with a thread of pepper, hot enough to make the day blink. Outside, the tide rakes the cobbles and leaves them wet and obedient. A breeze lifts the net over your hammock and sets it down again as if measuring. You lie back, count 5 slow breaths and feel ribs stop arguing. The island hums its same low tune. You don't love it, you know it. Evening finds a sound you forgot you knew. A man 2 hammocks down draws a mouth harp from a matchbox and coaxes a tune that rides the rafters like a quiet river. It is not a song about home, it is a song about moving through a day and still having a pulse afterward. A Breton taps time on a tin with a spoon. The fever man hums once and stops, surprised by his own voice. The guard on rounds doesn't bark. He slows, listens 2 steps longer than regulation, and continues without removing the air's small mercy. Afterward, the dominoes return to their grammar, a book you can read even when your eyes want nothing but dark. Someone shares a piece of preserved lime peel like it were a sacrament. It tastes of ships and patient barrels. You sit with your back to the post and let your shoulders settle in layers. For a minute the island softens its jaw. News drifts in with the smoke. A libere has papers that say he's finished, and the yard nods at the idea like men considering a new tool. Finished means 2 years of doublage on a shore that keeps the same weather, a job that pays in coin and stares, and a room that is not a cell, but also not a door. He smiles anyway, because printed words breathe in a way iron never will. You mend his strap as a present and he leaves a twist of tobacco under your bowl without ceremony. The sky pulls iron over itself and the first drops spot the dust. You tuck the mouth harp back in its matchbox, pinch the candle out with wet fingers, and climb into the sling that knows where your bones go now. Surf folds the same sentence against the same rocks, patient, exact. You turn on your side, find the knot you trust, and let the dark come all the way. By noon you draw brewery duty, which is a generous title for coaxing drinkable from dubious. A copper sits over a brick hearth, hooped like a fat sailor. You stir a mash of molasses, crushed cassava, and a handful of toasted rice that pretends to be wisdom. The steam smells like bread with ideas. A tin worm runs to a coil submerged in a barrel, and clear trickle finds a jar if the fire doesn't sulk. The overseer watches flame and drip, tapping the copper with a stick when it sounds sullen. You change the wet cloth on the coil, keep the seal honest with dough, and shoo away a wasp that wants to audit. The first cut burns like an argument. The late run tastes tired. So you save the middle for the wardroom and water the rest for men who earned a little sleep in a cup. When a guard sniffs and raises an eyebrow, you hold up the hydrometer like a talisman. He pretends to read it and leaves. You ladle slops to the pig and feel briefly generous. The pig grunts a thank you no ledger notes. You write a letter you will never send and fold it small enough to live in the seam of your shirt. It says what you would say if words could cross the cut without stamps or scissors. I work steady, I keep away from trouble, I try to learn the names of trees because trees stay. You add one line about a boy's mouth harp and another about the way lime wash brightens more than walls. You do not write escape, you write tide. You tuck the scrap where the seam won't crack, then sit with your back on the post and notch a line on the inside of your tin cup with a nail. One more week that didn't eat you. The cup looks like a map now, all short roads and dead ends, but it holds water just the same. You blow the candle out and lie still while the room edits itself into sleep. In the yard, a man named for his number sits on a step and places both hands on his kneecaps like they are misbehaving children. He has the cough that doesn't ask permission anymore. You bring water because it costs nothing and earns a breath. He drinks, nods, and tells you about a winter in a city that kept its windows shut. His voice moves slow, as if words must wade through syrup to reach air. He says he used to shoe horses and could tell a good hoof by the sound on cobble. He says irons here talk different. You listen because the island requires witnesses as much as workers. When he stands, you take his elbow without theatre. He shrugs you off at the second step, proud enough to keep one thing. Later you find his spoon polished bright as a mirror's memory, and understand he has chosen what to care for. We all choose something small. Heat in the oil shed wakes old rooms you left far behind. The smell of warm fat tugs a kitchen from memory. Iron pan, poor potatoes, a door that's stuck when it rained. You hear someone you loved clear a throat and hum an off-key bar. You don't turn to look because here you never turn to look for ghosts, but you salt the memory once, as if that makes it keep. A mate asks for a scrap of cloth to wipe his knife, and you hand it over before the song fades. Outside, a bell barks and stops. Someone drops a pan and swears polite. You push the press and their quarter turn and watch the thin stream thicken. You count breaths until the ache in your shoulder steadies. A fly circles the spout and you blow it away without lifting your eyes. The island lets you own a minute if you pay it back with 2. Morning weighs its thumb on your skull and expects movement. You rinse a mouth that tastes of pennies, scrub your teeth with ash and a rag, and swallow a mouthful of water that the clerk swears is enough for a man. Shirts lift, tags click, and the file points toward the clay pits inland where walls begin as mud with ideas. The path drinks your steps. A heron watches like a thin magistrate. At the pit, your boots sink a half thumb and give up arguing. The foreman wants bricks, and the foreman will be obeyed. You kick off the boots, roll your trousers, and step into a pool that remembers yesterday's ankles. Clay sucks and releases. A slow metronome you learn to dance to while a mate tosses in chopped thatch for temper. You tread until the mass turns from sullen to useful, heat collecting under your ribs like a small rude fire. No fitness trackers, just blisters. Inspection rumours buy effort the way rain buys green. Someone says the governor's launch has been seen twice this week. Someone else says a captain likes lines straight enough to bounce a coin. The yard changes shape. You scrape moss from the steps until stone remembers it was quarried. Limewash wakes in a bucket, chalk milk that dries honest on walls that have heard too much. Every hinge gets a drop of fat. Every latch learns to close with its first try. In carpentry, you true the edge of a table the commandant might notice, then shellac a box lid until it reflects a face you still recognise. The chapel smells of wax and lemon. Benches lined straight. A borrowed ribbon finds the missile. When the launch finally appears, the governor walks the yard with a hat that keeps its own weather. He nods twice and asks one question about drainage. The foreman points. The governor accepts the answer and the island exhales. Theatre over. Tools back to work. Fever returns with its tidy calendar and demands to be heard. It climbs your spine in small hands, sits behind your eyes, and makes light rude. The medic reads your pulse like he's timing tides. Quinine arrives in chalky moons. You place them under your tongue, count to 20, and swallow regret. The fever breaks, forgets you, then remembers at dusk and repeats itself because rules are rules. A mate brings water that tastes like pennies and peels a singed banana from the hearth, sweet enough to trick your stomach into trying again. He tells you to keep the blanket though night feels like noon. He says sweat now saves time later. You do. Dreams come short and practical. You stirring rice, you tying a bowline, you counting spikes, you waking at the bell because even sleep obeys the yard. By morning the fever leaves a note, not finished. You stand anyway. The pick will not lift itself, and pity here is a dwindling commodity. A quiet economy lives in repairs. You trade 3 sharpened nails for a spoon drilled into a ladle, and a strip of tin for a guard's boot sole that stopped listening. He stands like a stump while you stitch, and afterward he slides you a twist of pepper without watching his own hand. In the smithy, you reforge a hinge that once held a door in France, and now holds a window. The wind keeps explaining. A bone needle in your hat brim becomes a ticket. Men bring shirts to mend, nets to patch, a hammock ring to re-whip, and in return they bring sentences you write for them on the veranda table. You keep your letters straight, your prices modest, and your eyes elsewhere when a man pays you with a half onion wrapped in cloth like treasure. The canteen shed notices and offers a bar of soap shaved thin as honesty. You decline twice, accept once. The island runs on favours more than rules and remembers both. Morning hands you a new tool, a loop of plaited coir, and a hook knife bright as a wet tooth. The foreman assigns the coconut stand above the cove where last night's storm dropped green husks like helmets. You learn the strap the quick way, loop around the trunk, lean back, feet flat, and let friction pretend to be friendship. Ants disagree with the plan and patrol your shins in black punctuation. At each crown you twist the stem until the nut makes a voice like damp cork. 3 together ride a single rope with a knot you can trust. You drop them to sand with a thud that brings a gull, then climb again slow, so the bark doesn't teach you a faster way down. By mid-morning your legs shake, your hands smell of green milk, and the pile builds into a pyramid that will become water, oil, rope, and biscuits, in that order if the quartermaster behaves. A breeze explores the grove and changes its mind. You wipe your forearms with a leaf and go again because the strap won't lift itself. Delousing day is posted on a board that sweats. You queue under the veranda for a tin of sulphur grease the colour of old mustard. The medic dabs it behind ears, in armpits, and along waist seams where small citizens claim squatters' rights. Shirts soak in blue soap and lime, hammocks boil until the water loses interest in killing. A barber scrapes scalps smooth for the fever gang, and trims the rest of us to compliance, hair falling like grey rain. The smell is sour and clean at once. You rub wrists with ash, tie your tag cord fresh, and shake the hammock until the last excuse drops. Nets dry on a line strung from palm to pump shed. Triangles of hope fluttering like poor flags. A guard checks knots and pretends not to inhale the rare smell of honest soap. It feels like armour. It will last a week if luck stays awake. Letters take their chances through a room that prefers scissors. You sit at the table and write small, I work steady, I am well enough. I have the sea. You mention a bird that steals soap because that seems safe, and a wall that stands truer than it did. The censor opens envelopes with a knife that could gut fish. His pencil drifts, pauses, and draws a blue bar over adjectives, sometimes entire afternoons. A stamp falls like a lid upon a pot. He's not cruel, he's employed. A man to your left slips a pressed leaf inside and the leaf returns shaved to a vein. When your turn comes, he raps the margin with the same rhythm the bell uses and looks at your hands, not your face. The oval stamp blooms blue on the corner. You seal, hand it over, and feel lighter by a page that may or may not cross water. A mistake finds you quick. 3 words traded beyond lights out. Nothing strategic, only human. The Sergeant Major assigns the mitard at noon for 24 hours of study and silence. The door swallows light the way a mouth holds breath. Stone sweats. Bread arrives on schedule and water in a dipper that tastes of iron and old fingers. You learn the room by hand, one seam in the wall, a high slit that moves a blade of day, a floor that pitches toward a drain. Time is a rope you pull with both fists, gives an inch and takes two. You count your breath to teach minutes how to behave. Ants travel the same route 10 times and never ask why. When the latch finally speaks again, your eyes argue with the yard's width and lose for a moment. The bell sounds like a stranger calling your name. Work answers with iron. The lighthouse crew borrows you for a day, and you climb the spiral where air cools and smells of salt brass. The keeper unlocks the lantern room with keys that chime like small bells. You wipe prisms with linen and alcohol until the facets stop sulking and begin to throw slicing rainbows across your forearms. Wicks are trimmed to crescents. The lamp oil sits in its cistern like patient amber. A ledger marks bearings, weather, and flame height in figures neat enough to walk on. Down below, a boy pumps water to the tank and sings without intending to. When dusk leans in, the lamp opens its eye and the whole horizon answers. You stand one pace back and watch the beam sweep the cut toward Devil's Island like a slow repeated warning. The sea nods that it heard. It doesn't promise more. Dawn spudges the yard the colour of old coins, and you report to the boat slip where a yawl waits with a patient rope. The task is simple on paper. Ferry cut stone to a reef where the channel sulks. Land it on a ledge between swells, then come home with all fingers. The coxswain is a quiet bull of a man who knows how water lies. He points where to sit, where to brace, when to breathe. Oars ship out. Spray salts your lips and writes tiny stings across your arms. At the mark, you and the bowman lean to lift, time the drop to the trough, and let the sea slam the block into its bed. The island owns the echo. A current tugs the keel polite as a pickpocket. The coxswain corrects with 2 strokes that feel like advice. You count 3 sets, then 4, then forget counting and think only about knuckles and the way rock remembers direction when it's told kindly. Back ashore, the rigging yard calls, a tangle of spars and lines waiting for hands that listen. You lay out a new mast for the work's scow, measuring in spans because rulers' warp and lies should be consistent. The adze finds rhythm heel to toe, chips flying in curls that land on your shoulders like pale birds. Pitch warms in a pot and strings itself into brown necklaces whenever a brush argues. You cut a 10 on clean and test it in the partner. It seats with a sigh of a truth finally spoken. Qua shrouds twist under your palm. A clove hitch bites, a rolling hitch persuades, and Deadeye's answer with a creak that sounds almost like approval. When the spar stands, 3 men hold and 1 shims. You step back, wipe your forehead with a sleeve that has no clean left, and watch the scow remember how to look forward. Tools hang themselves in order after use, because order here is a savings account. Noon brings a new chore that feels like penance and medicine at once. You join the limewash crew, ladders across shoulders, buckets of chalk milk bobbing at your knees. Walls drink the first coat greedy, sucking wet into pores that learn dust too well. You cut in around shutters with a brush that sheds, thinning the line where wood meets masonry so rain has less to aim at. Drips stripe your forearms. Your tongue tastes lemon and powder when sweat runs through the spray. A boy on the ground keeps the pail stirred so the mix doesn't turn sullen. Over the chapel door you write the date small with the ferrule, not to boast, only so some later hand knows which storm to thank or curse. When the sun shifts, the whole yard looks one shade cleaner. A quiet bluff thrown at rot. It will peel, but not today. Small victories count, especially on Tuesdays. Where lime pools at your elbows, the skin prickles, then calms when you keep moving. In the shade after work, a different school opens. A warder's boy, sharp as a tack and twice as likely to prick pride, brings scraps of newspaper and reads headlines until the room lifts its eyebrows. Trains, somewhere broke a record. A minister resigned and then didn't. A new bicycle claims to fly over roads like a careful bird. You trade him a needle for an extra column and the atlas for a night, because words are food you can hide. You copy vowels on a slate, shaping them steady until your hand stops wobbling with the day. He asks you to read one line back, and you do, slow, honest, each letter a step on a rope bridge. The room hums approval in its throat. Someone says the bicycle is a liar and still smiles. Lamps hiss. Moths attend. As lessons end, the boy pockets his needle like a coin and leaves taller than when he arrived. Hunger never stops negotiating, so you build a stove from stones at the back of the yard. 3 good flat ones and a 4th that pretends. A mate turns a sardine tin into a pan by pinching 2 corners. Another twists wire into a handle that will not outlive dawn. You borrow 1 onion, trade a pinch of pepper, and shave cassava thin as a saint's patience. The oil is a miraculous teaspoon, all that remains from a guard's favour remembered. Heat says yes, slices crisp and curl, the onion goes sweet enough to talk, and the yard gathers like a quiet court approving a fair sentence. You share the chips with a dignity that makes the portion feel larger. Even the fever man manages a smile that believes in tomorrow for half a minute. You bank the stones after, let them stay warm for washing tins, and kick sand until all smell is story. A clean pan is future. Night patrol thins near the mangrove mouth, as predicted by the man who knows moons. You walk there on pretense of latrine and stand still long enough to learn the dark's different shades. The tide pulls at the roots with a locksmith's touch. Across the cut, Devil's Island sits like a thought you do not say to anyone decent. You track lanterns, one at the guardhouse, one on the dock, none where the current curls into a sly. Your hands know knots now, your feet know which plank complains. When you turn back, you count steps and make a map with the soles of your feet. Planning is not doing. You repeat that twice, a charm against water, and place the spare canteen behind a stone where only your fingers will think to seek it. The stars refuse to help, and that is honest. You sleep light, but you sleep. A fish breaks the surface and writes a brief silver line, then erases it. Not tonight, you tell the water, and it accepts the lie for now. A guard you barely know makes a mistake in your favour. He pauses at the oil shed door, studies the ledger with proper boredom, and then sets an extra ladle of rice on your bowl without comment. You do not smile, you do not look up. He moves on, boots speaking their usual sentences. You eat slower to make the gift last, and hide the last mouthful under a scrap until eyes pass. Later, at the pump, he asks if the press squeals less when cloth is new. You answer in a handful of words that do not carry any further than his sleeve. He nods like a fisherman who already knew the tide, and wanted to see if you did too. Mercy here wears a uniform and keeps its hat on. You wash your bowl, rinse his ladle, and hang both where sun will do honest work. Nothing to report. Night drags a weather front over the ridge, and asks the roofs to confess their sins. You climb the ladder with a satchel of nails and a candle stub, lay a board across 2 rafters, and fill the building. Think. Rain slants hard enough to find seams you didn't know existed. You press a strip of tar paper, drive 2 nails by feel, and listen to the pitch change when the wind admits defeat for one small edge. Lightning shows the cove pale as bone, and the mangroves scribbling. The lantern in the lighthouse turns its patient circle and writes the same sentence on water. There is rock. The dawn below smells of damp rope and breath. When you climb down, a drip still finds your neck just inside the door. You move your hammock a handspan and that solves it. Solved for now. The surf counts without needing you. Dawn posts you to a survey gang, the closest thing the island has to drawing straight lines on moving water. A corporal carries the plane table like a fragile secret. A trusty's shoulders are level, and a staff scarred by years of wrong numbers. You and 2 others pay out the chain. Brass tags clicking every 2 meters, feet feeling for the same ground twice, so results behave. The air tastes of tin. Mosquitoes drill at the wrist bone. where skin forgets defence. The corporal sights along a peep and mumbles bearings, trusty marks with pencil stubs shaved to needles. You chop a sight lane through sawgrass and sniff the sour of mud that remembers fish. When the creek bends, you hammer a stake and tie a rag so tomorrow can find the same argument. The line is for a drain that will let the road keep pretending to be a road. You wipe the lens with a breath and shirt hem, nod at the reading and move, because numbers here need hands. By mid-morning you're knee-deep where the survey says dig, boots arguing with roots that braid like stubborn cousins. A caiman lies in the next reach pretending to be a stick and log. The trusty taps water with a pole, and the shape slides off, lazy as a landlord. You lay fascines, bundles of brush pinned with stakes, across ooze, until they learn to be firm, then shovel silt away from their ribs, so water finds the courtesy of direction. Leeches audition for clerkships on your ankles. You salt them and they resign without gratitude. A vulture turns slow over the grove, bored of our chances. The guard checks distance with a thumb and a scowl. He's not cruel, he's wet. A joke travels the trench and dissolves. You push the mud downstream with both hands until Brown clears to tea. No park ranger hotline, just rope. Afternoon gift, barrels and pitch. The commandant wants more rain kept and less hauled, so you clean 6 tons that once knew wine and now know rot. You scrape staves with a curved draw knife, boil river water with a fist of lye, and rinse until the inside stops lying with stink. Pitch warms in a pot and strings when you lift a stick. You pour it thin and roll the barrel until seams drink. Hoops answer the hammer with a music you can predict. Tight, then tighter, then done. You cut gutters from split palms, slope them honest, and test the run with a dipper, while the roof sulks through the last of last night's rain. A girl in a mainland newspaper could sell soap for this shine, if we had newspapers that cared. You chalk the barrel heads with dates and a tidy X to show they passed the nose. When you lift the first clear cup, it tastes like wood and reprieve. Evening school returns with beans on the board and patience on the tongue. The Breton writes long numbers as if he were tying knots. No haste, no boasts, just crossings that hold. You trade him one sentence to his girl for a lesson on sums thou art carry. The warder's boy brings a clipping about a world fair. He reads a paragraph and your mouth tries the same shapes and mostly wins. You copy letters slow, each curve a small stubborn trench. The fever man leans on the jam and repeats a line about machines so big they need buildings to hold them. He smiles like someone remembering a baker's window. After class, you repair the boy's belt with a stitched square, and he pays you with 2 nails and a word you haven't heard in months. Bravo. You hide it the way you hide pepper. Use sparingly. Remember taste later. A moth lands on the atlas. Someone rescues it with a spoon and the room nods. Night search announces itself with careful boots and a cough that warns the decent. The dorm turns into a museum of nothing. Hammock rings show only rope. Blankets fold exact. The contraband that exists turns suddenly into tools or vanishes into places you would not describe to a priest. Needle taped inside a spoon handle, pebble whetstone slid under a heel cap, a twist of tobacco asleep in the hollow of a bed peg. Guard lifts your net, checks the seam you stitched and finds only neatness. He taps your cup, hears tin and moves on. 2 bunks down, a man forgot a second pencil. The trustee pockets it before the list grows teeth. The sergeant major reads the room like a ledger, and writes almost nothing because everything already learned to behave. When they leave, the dorm exhales one quiet, disrespectful breath. Dominoes resume their grammar. A rat climbs, reconsiders philosophy, and descends. The moon gives you more map than you deserve. You walk the path behind the cookhouse and count beats between lanterns. 7 slow strides, then 9, then a blind corner where almond leaves make paper sounds. At the mangrove mouth, the tide turns like a man deciding whether to write a letter. Your cache behind the stones still sleeps where you taught it. Far across, Devil's Island is a single shade darker than night, the lighthouse beam grazing its shoulder at each sweep like a warning and a dare. You feel the itch of the rope you tie around a waist, the pull of a current shaped like the word maybe. You do not step in. You recite tomorrow's chores instead. Bricks to turn, a wheel to grease, letters to copy for a man who never met his only name on paper until here. Because anchors come in different forms. You tuck the canteen deeper, wipe one palm on your thigh, and walk back counting the same 7, then 9. Knowledge keeps. Courage waits its turn. Morning makes a bargain. You get cloud for an hour if you spend it hauling salt. The salines behind the mangrove flash dull pewter, pans rimmed with crust like white fingernails. You rake brine into windrows with a wooden squeegee, slow enough that the water doesn't jump the lip, fast enough that the foreman doesn't look twice. Crystals rasp under the blade like paper being folded. A boy tips baskets. Your job is to carry them to the drying rack without spilling what passes for winter here. Salt bites the heel cuts and insists on being respected. When the wind sneezes, a dry veil lifts and coats tongues and eyebrows until everyone tastes like a kept promise. The pans sparkle with a mean beauty. Clouds slide off the sun and the bargain ends on schedule. You stack baskets under palm thatch and cover them with sacks so the first squall won't turn pay into soup. A gull lands on the rack and pecks at the crystals as if auditioning for a uniform. You shoe it with the rake, then write the day's tally in salt on a plank and watch the numbers sweat away. The afternoon heat drives you under the shed where baskets get born. Ribs of split cane bend over a jig that remembers diameter better than men remember birthdays. You soak staves in a trough until they stop arguing, then weave them under and over with a patience that starts in the wrists and ends somewhere near the breath. The trick, the old hand says, is to keep the corners from deciding they are curves. You pin a rim with pegs cut from orange wood, tap them home with a sliver of palm and trim the stubs with a knife that behaves only when spoken to softly. A fresh basket drinks the light and looks like something you could trust. You test a handle with both hands, lift a stone and listen for lies. It holds, so you brand the number in the base with a hot nail and hang it where breeze will teach it to shrug off damp. Your shirt sticks, your fingers wear cane glass, and somewhere a cricket decides the shed is church. You keep weaving because woven things stay when rope fails. Evening lends blue to the yard, and a warder volunteers a story without knowing he has. He mentions a storm that peeled a launch from her moorings and dashed it grey on the reef. Men on Devil's Island watched the beams swing past and could not decide if the warning was laugh or prayer. You picture that sliver of shore, the black shoulder, the little path between rocks polished by hopeless feet. Our launch, he says, carried a box of dry bread and a coil of line. The bread dissolved. The line came back with knots in it no sailor claimed. A silence moves across the yard like shade, and even the gulls practice respect. He shrugs as if to close a ledger and walks on, boots speaking sentences that end in periods, not questions. You fold the tale into your pocket as you would a map you do not yet intend to read. Later, the lighthouse writes its patient circle and the reef says nothing at all. Night slips a film of cool over the dorm, and for once sleep pretends to be free. You lie in the sling and listen to the small lives share the room. The gecko clicking like someone tisking a child, the moth that insists on the flame and then does not. The careful foot of the rat who thinks he's invisible when he isn't. The fever man's breath has evened to a respectable tenant. You rub oil into a cracked heel, think of roads that didn't ask this much, and tuck the bone needle deeper into your hatband because you have learned what gets searched. Outside, a palm frond knocks the wall with a slow, forgiving hand. You practice the tide table once through, then forgive yourself for forgetting one figure, because forgetting sometimes keeps you. Quinine ghosts still haunt the tongue. You chase them with a mouthful of water that tastes like wood and mercy. Sleep approaches the way a wary dog does, sideways, sniffing, and finally decides you're not dangerous tonight. At dawn, the bell orders an island of chores into a narrow line, and you join because joining extends breath. The day's first bucket tastes of wood. The first tool you lift says its name like an oath. You walk to the drain with a shovel that has already seen the future and pledge to endure it. Mud greets you with the slow embrace of family you never claimed. 2 strokes, 3, a heave into the barrow, A step back to keep the slope from owning your shins. The trusty calls pace, and an egret stalks the ditch like a thin inspector, approving each frog with grave attention. When the sun clears the palms, your shirt is a flag of surrender, and you keep working anyway. By 8, the water listens better. By 9, it remembers where the creek intends to go. You lean on the shovel, count breaths, and offer the day you're back again without speeches. The drain holds its new line through breakfast, and you're posted to the launch with a crate marked Lantern Stores and a list that would rather be shorter. The cove rides a clean swell, the crew rows with the quiet competence of men who trust wrists more than luck. Ile du Diable rises close, black rock shaved by patient water. You land at the iron rings and pass the crate up the steps that bite calves like small dogs. A warder with weather in his beard signs for oil and wicks. His keys talk against buttons. Men in brown move along the path above, not quite looking down, not quite allowed to do otherwise. Silence wears a uniform here. You help swap a cracked pane in the lamp's door, easing the glass so brass keeps its temper, then haul 2 sacks of charcoal to the keeper's shed. On the way back you step wide around a narrow cross set in a seam of basalt. No name, just a number gone quiet. Back on Royale, the afternoon gives you the tag bench, a table that prints identity into tin. Strips of roofing off-cut become ovals beneath a hand punch. The die bites with the same small click each time, and numbers march out bright as fresh teeth. You dome tags on a hollow block with a ball peen, so edges won't fray cloth. Drill a neat eye and thread cord that smells of iodine and sweat. A ledger lists men under their digits. Your own number looks steady and ordinary on the page, as if being ordinary kept you. You repaint a stencil for shirts, thin black, careful bridges, and test it on scrap. Neat, legible, obedient to soap. The foreman checks that the 9 is not an inverted 6 and that the stroke on the 7 still leans like a tired post. You wipe the bench, sweep tin moons into a jar for later, and hold one warm tag long enough to feel its memory go blank. Rain walks in mid-shift with the unhurried certainty of a captain finding his chair. You stand under the smithy eave and share a dry thumb of plank with the Corsican, who tells you about goat bells you can hear across hills when wind minds its work. He cups the memory like a match. You offer your own, apples stored under stairs, their sugar like a secret in winter, and the 2 smells stand a moment in warm water where they do not belong. The rain thickens until the ground stops keeping up. A gull sits on the ridge like a wet certificate. You braid 3 short lengths of coir without thinking, and hand him one, so his pocket can own something the island didn't issue. He nods and ties a simple Turk's head around his wrist, not for show, only to teach the hours to pass a little slower. When the squall ends, steam climbs like forgiveness, and both of you step back to work. Supper is sardines mashed with onion on hot cassava, soured with a sting of lime that makes every man in reach lean closer. You eat beside the fever man, who has learned to fold sleep into small, productive naps. He shows you a trick for using a tooth with a twist of cloth and salt. You share the mouth harp a minute and let him find the note that doesn't pry at ribs. After bowls, you mend a rosary for the chapel with wax thread and a needle that knows more lives than yours. Each bead rolls back obedient as a soldier to ranks. The priest thanks you with a few clean minutes sweeping in shade, and 2 pages from a missal too damaged to matter to the censor. You cannot read the Latin yet, but the paper feels cool and sure. A boy brings the day's chalk, and you write tomorrow's tool roster on the board with letters almost straight. The yard reads them and nods the way people nod at weather. Night patrol takes a new route, and you take a new habit. Walking the pier to read the tide's temper, without promising anything beyond reading. You stand where the planks darken with spray, count the beats between slaps that reach your boots, and note the angle where the eddy decides to mind the wind. A fish breaks like a thrown coin and is gone. You climb down one rung and let a hand hang in water. The pull is more persuasive than yesterday and less than last week. Across the cut, Devil's Island blinks once, and you step back up because blinking is a language you respect. On the path in, you move the canteen to a higher stone, less obvious to a bored lantern. You turn a shell over with your toe and leave it pointing homeward out of superstition you don't admit. Planning stays folded. The sea will still be here tomorrow, impatient and exact. Back in the dorm, quiet collects like dew. You hang your shirt with the slow pride of a man who made every stitch try. The mouth harp gives 3 low notes and rests. The dominoes choose a modest end. You oil the wheelbarrow handle you wedged yesterday and watch the wood drink until the grain stops shining. A gecko patrols the beam, taking the night's smallest taxes. You count 5 breaths in, 5 out, a ledger that never closes and still comforts. The net lifts, settles. Far off, the lighthouse writes its patient circle, marking rock, marking hours, marking us. You tuck the unsent letter deeper in the seam and touch the knot that keeps your sling honest. When sleep comes, it does not make promises. It just sets a hand on your shoulder and waits. The surf folds the same sentence against the same black stone. You listen because listening is the work you can finish tonight. The transport comes in low and mean, a hull that learned to keep secrets. You stand on the pier with a coil on your shoulder and watch new men step onto wood that sweats, eyes bright from fever or hope. Hard to say which hurts took more. Barbers wait with clippers, clerks with slates, guards with voices that have practiced the same sentences so long they sound like weather. You shoulder a crate and slip a nod to a kid whose boots belong to someone larger. You show him where to set his bowl so rats won't draft their own menu, how to knot the tag cord twice, how to keep soap in a tin because a man without soap is a rumour. He asks about work and you answer by pointing quarry, woodlot, drains, kitchen, cemetery. He looks at Devil's Island the way a dog looks at thunder. You tell him water lies and iron tells the truth. He laughs because he thinks you mean it as a joke. You did once. The cemetery asks for hands and the quiet, so you bring both. Crosses lean, you true them with a line and a shovel heel, pack red dust tight around their feet, then wipe the numbers with a rag dipped in lime milk so the black reads again. On one plank the paint never took, you pick letters into the wood with a nail, and a patience you didn't use to own. Coffin boards you planed last month have settled, their seams hold. A gull walks the wall like a fussy aunt and finds nothing to correct. You scrape the path of crawlers and lay a little shell on each fresh mound, not from faith, just from habit. When no one watches, you etch a letter the dead once said his mother's name began with small under the number, a kindness that will rot at a different speed. On the way back, you wash your hands in a bucket and the water clouds the same as always. Grief here is maintenance. The rope walk hums like a fat bee. Coir curls in drifts, brown as old bread. You tease fibres with a hackle until they learn parallel, then feed them into the traveller while a boy turns the crank. 3 lays twist into a strand, 3 strands into a hawser, and your palms memorise the ratio so the rope doesn't lie under load. The gauge board waits with holes cut true. You pass the new line through and watch it round itself honest. Splices follow, short, long eye, each tuck smoothed with a mallet kiss until nothing snags flesh. You teach the boy to keep yarn in his cheek for whipping ends. He grins, forgets, and tries again. By noon, coils rise like patient snakes, tagged for derrick, launch, or lashings. You make 1 pocket length for yourself, Turk's head at one end, Matthew Walker at the other, a little ledger of knots you trust. The foreman pretends not to see, and you pretend not to keep it. Every man needs 1 legal secret. Stormlight writes green across the yard and turns tin to drums. You and 3 others run the roofline, nailing loose sheets before the squall decides math. Wind shoulders the palms until fronds clap their long hands. Rain snakes sideways under the eaves and licks stone like a starving dog. The pump squeals and then sings. You set barrels under the downspouts until they quarrel with overflow. In the dorm, hammocks come down a rung to dodge drips. Nets billow like gulls in rehearsal. Someone swears he saw a fish in the lane. Someone else swears he tasted soap in the rain and is grateful both ways. Lightning makes the lighthouse blink wrong for one count, then right itself with modesty. When the worst passes, you mop the steps with a broom that remembers better days and hang shirts under the beam where heat stacks like bad grammar. The squall leaves everything cleaner except men. You pocket one bent nail for later and call it profit. Sunday turns softer not by nature but by agreement. Chapel smells of wax and rope. Benches hold surrenders and bad backs without comment. The priest speaks of mercy like a thing you can store in a jar if you keep the lid clean. You don't queue for the box, you file past the tool shed instead and fix the hinge that kept complaining to no one. In the yard, letters are handed like rain that remembered addresses, none for you today, so you borrow a page and write 3 lines you won't send, then tear the margin into a strip and weave it into your knot, a paper core for a rope charm small as a thumb. The fever man sits on the step, sun on his knees. You trade him half your ration of lime water for the story of a street where the baker lined his window at 5 and the city praised him with coins. He drinks, nods, and keeps the praise short. Mercy here runs on rations too. Evening gives you the pier back, and you take it the way a tired man takes shade. Tide is making, the eddy at the pilings wears a new crease. The chop reads ordinary. You stand one rung down again and let your hand sink to the wrist. The pull says maybe in a dialect you now understand. You take the canteen from the new hiding place, weigh it, and set it deeper again where only your fingers practice. A launch grumbles around the headland. You count the gaps in its lantern swing and step up before it rounds the point. Across the cut, Devil's Island lies patient, as if stone invented waiting. You walk back slow past the rope walk and smell dry queer, like bread without mercy. In the dorm, the mouth harp gives 3 notes and rests. You coil your charm and tuck it under the tag cord, a little weight where the number sits. The lighthouse draws a circle on water. You nod to it once. The circle holds. You learn spoons because a man has to choose what future touches his mouth. Scrapboard. A bow saw that sulks, a knife you edge on a pebble until it begins to believe, and coals from the cookhouse nurse the hollow when the blade wants help. You shave with the grain so the lip won't splinter in a hurry, then sand with shark skin traded for 2 nails. A notch on the neck lets a cord keep it close to the bowl. The fever man watches the shape arrive and smiles the way a patient does when a doctor hands back a pulse. You oil the spoon with coconut until the wood turns the colour of tea and leaves a shine like patience. In the dorm, you scratch your number in the handle's heel with a pin so the island remembers who fed you once. Tools answer honestly, that is their quiet religion. A garden fits where discipline misses. Beside the drain, you tuck pepper seeds in a seam of sandy loam and press them with the flat of your spoon, like a signature you don't want noticed. Lemongrass divides by generosity. 2 clumps become 4, then a border that stops mud from voting. A guard points with his chin, no approval, no complaint, then steps on a crab and calls it even. By late month, a thin green insists on being useful. You pinch a chili with the delicacy of a thief, carry it to the kitchen like a found coin, and watch the cook slice it into soup that suddenly believes in itself. The bed drinks the evening overhead drip, and the earth remembers rain with gratitude you can smell. No grand garden, just a palm's worth of stubborn. The lighthouse keeper cares for glass like priests for relics. He lets you wipe 1 prism slow while he reads bearings under his breath. Numbers walking as a circle that the sea understands. He says the beam isn't for warders or prisoners. It is for water that forgets where rock lives. He says the lamp's pulse gives ships a name for a coast that would otherwise keep its secrets. You nod because that is also the work, to mark the hard place so others don't learn it by shin. He oils a hinge with the care of a letter writer, checks the wick twice because twice is the number that holds. When you step out, the sun slides under low cloud and the lantern room begins to glow by habit. You stand on the stair 1 beat longer than allowed, and let it write its deliberate alphabet across your ribs. Reading travels in small bowls now. The warder's boy brings a page from a Julius Verne, left to dry too near a window. The print buckled, The adventure didn't. You sound one sentence about steel and light, halt twice, then carry the word to shore without dropping it. He grins and points at a vowel you shorted. You read it again and it stays. On a scrap you copy numbers straight as fence pickets and learn to add without borrowing hope. After class he shows a watch that ticks like an insect. He holds it to your ear and asks if the island sounds like that. You say no, the island has a slower beat that lives in wrists and knees. He nods as if he knew and pockets the hour. You sharpen his pencil with a file until it stops wasting wood. Rain kept all week finally pays a dividend. The new barrels drink steady. You steep lemongrass and a bruised guava leaf until steams and smells like a porch you will never see again and are grateful anyway. Men pass the tin cup in a circle, and the warder who pretends not to watch pretends not to smile. The fever man takes his sip and claims the ache shifted a chair to the other side of the room. You admit your own knees feel less argumentative. A moth swims the cup once, is rescued by spoon, and resumes its night job. You write tomorrow's roster on the board and spell the Corsican's name properly, because he once told you how his mother said it. The chalk squeaks, then behaves. The cup comes back polite as grace. Night walks you down to the pier because habit keeps more men alive than courage. Tide writes its new language at the pilings. The eddy frowns differently, less certain of itself. You stand one rung down and let your hand read the pull to the wrist bone. Maybe later, it says, in a voice that remembers all the names you've counted. You shift the canteen to a higher stone, tighten the stopper, and push it back where it learns patience. Across the cut, Devil's Island lies with the same indifference as last night, which is almost comfort. You tell the water. Not tonight, without pride or shame. On the walk in, you touch your rope charm twice, a superstition you keep folded small. The dawn breathes, the mouth harp waits. You lie back and let the surf mark time for both of you. The quarry loosens its jaw with a crack you recognise too late. A seam that lied yesterday tells the truth in one long sentence, and the face steps forward to shake hands with the ground. You shout, the hammerman drops to his knees and crawls backward like a sailor under a swinging boom, and dust turns noon to twilight. When the world picks one shape again, the Breton is on his side with his leg teaching a letter the body never learned. You and the foreman build a splint from a plank that wanted to be a shelf and strips torn from a shirt that wanted to be a shirt. He clenches the strap, says nothing loud, then says one soft word about bells in distant hills. 4 men lift on a board and the gang makes a road where there isn't one, stones moving under boots as if they would like to help. You keep your eyes from his eyes and count steps. In the infirmary the air tastes of metal and lye. The medic's hands are tired and right. He sets the fracture with a calm that steals panic's hat. The Breton grips your sleeve and asks you to tell him a thing that happened on a boat once. Any boat, any water, so long as it had a breeze. You give him the memory of a cheap ferry where a woman dropped a scarf and a stranger caught it with a hook before it learned how to drown. He nods as if you brought him soup that tasted of pepper. The quinine jar gives up moons, the rope sling takes the leg, the board becomes a bed. You wash the dust from his hair with a rag and an old story about a goat that hated church bells more than anything. He breathes through his nose and tells the goat to mind its own business. The chuckle costs him and he pays without complaint. Night cuts the dorm into hammocks. You sit on the step because the day still runs. The Breton sleeps in a room that keeps lamps later. The fever man tells you about a winter stove and the sound of coal climbing to heat like a choir. He says pain is a tide that can be read. He says you can step between waves if you listen to the pause. He shows you how to bind a cloth to keep pressure where bone forgives, not where it resents. You think of the rope walk, the strands lying together so one carries the stretch when another forgets. He asks if you will carry the Breton's next letter for dictation. You say yes, and in the morning you sharpen a pencil to a needle and borrow your straightest hand. The words are ordinary, salt air, a man's leg, a remembered field with wet grass at knees. Ordinary stands better than hope. The Breton's body tries to leave by fever and is negotiated back by water, blankets, and a medic's voice that has walked this path too often to speak large. You fetch slops, boil cloth, and rub his hands until colour remembers. He asks you to keep the rope charmed a while, the one you tied slow on a soft evening when the quayside sloshed like a bucket. He says it should learn your number before it sees the sea again. You slip it on your wrist beside the tag cord and feel both weights argue, then shake hands. Outside the infirmary, a gull walks with a limp that looks exactly like a man's and still manages to steal a rind from a bucket. He goes at dawn anyway, boat bells replaced by a breath that finally forgets the oar. The yard does what the yard always does. The cart, the plank, the box you once planed, the cords that remember how to pay out without dropping. You help lower and keep your hand on the rope so it won't leap. The priest says what he says. The cook stands bareheaded and looks at his shoes. The foreman holds his hat like law. You scratch a small B on the cross foot, not from faith, from grammar, because the alphabet deserves company here. The sea eats the same rocks with the same teeth and the same restraint. On the walk down, you place the rope charm on the nail where your cup hangs and leave it there one full day. Work takes the hours the way wind takes laundry. No offence meant, no argument accepted. You report to the rope walk because a hawser frayed during the squall. You splice long with the care of men who learn cost by skin. Strands lie loyal under your thumbs. The tuck moves, the mallet speaks, the taper smooths until the rope forgets surgery and agrees to be whole. The boy holds the end and doesn't ask where the Breton went to because he already knows. You teach him the trick of keeping yarn in the cheek and his yes comes out muffled and proud. At break you pour water over the splice and watch the fibres swell with gratitude. The rope hums when you haul it tight. You hum back without thinking. A letter arrives with petals pressed so flat they forgot colour and kept scent. Your sister writes 2 pages of small weather and a line about a child who learned to skip a stone so far it seemed to take a job. You read it twice and then again for the part where she says your name like a used chair that still holds. You answer on the veranda with the steady hand you borrowed for the Breton. I am well enough. I am working. I will write again when the tide allows. You add 1 sentence about a man who loved bells and a goat that hated them. You do not explain. The censor stamps the oval and the blue sits like a lid that might hold a small boil to simmer. At lights out you lift the charm from your nail, tie it on and sleep with your hand over it until the island forgets its manners. Days become a braid you can follow without looking. Quarry to rope walk to kitchen to drain, each strand taking its turn so none snaps in a showy way. You tuck the garden before muster, pinch 1 chili, and hide 2 seeds in the hem of your hat because insurance learns new uniforms here. In carpentry you true a plain sole with charcoal and a sheet of iron until the tool sings flat again. In the smithy you dress a hammer face that mushroomed from honesty. Evening school sets beans for subtraction, and you count backward from a number you thought would never forgive. Men ask for letters and you write them, plain as bread, because fancy won't cross water. The spoon you carve tastes of smoke and a little pride. You keep it on a loop where your tag hangs, 2 truths close enough to argue and still share a neck. The warder's boy says he's going to Guiana for a month because his aunt took a fever and then didn't. He hands you a newspaper cut into fish shapes and laughs when you pretend to scold the scissors. You stitch his belt 1 more time, add a small keeper from scrap, and hide a Turk's head knot on the inside where he will feel it, and remember to be careful on steps. He leaves you the pencil stub you sharpen to a needle and asks for your favourite word. You tell him plomb because it tastes like a weight you know how to carry. He pockets the sound as if it were coin and promises to bring back a page that didn't get wet. You nod and teach your hand not to wave too long when the launch steps away. The guard with boots you mended 3 times sits on a crate and shows you a stone he likes because it looks like the island left out 1 soft corner by mistake. He says his boy on the mainland can already climb a palm without crying and he didn't at that age. You nod, ease a nail out the crate lid, and offer a new angle so the hinge will stop complaining. He watches the ocean like someone who hears 2 languages and only knows half of each. When he goes, he leaves half a lime on the bench, and you cut it into 4 with a knife that does not resent work. You pass 3/4 to men who keep their gratitude quiet and chew the last until your jaw wakes. The crate lid shuts without threatening anyone. The dawn builds a calm that doesn't owe you. The mouth harp speaks low. The dominoes tap their little treaties. The net lifts and settles like someone practicing kindness. You mend a strap and pay yourself in thread, then bend a spoon the feverman treasures into a ladle that makes his evening easier. The atlas comes out and you follow a river with a finger that can now spell its name slowly. Someone asks if you will try tonight. You touch the rope charm and shake your head once. The tide sounds argumentative and the wind can't make up its mind. A gull pecks your boot as if to say you are late, and you tell it you are busy. It believes you because your voice is tired and honest. A quiet philosophy assembles itself from chores you can finish. You learn to value a knot that holds without swelling, a hinge that closes without persuading, a letter that reaches without bleeding, a plant that asks for water and gives you a taste that wakes the soup. Men here are numbered and still manage grammar. Hello, move, thanks, careful, sleep. You keep your tools oiled because metal forgives work and not neglect. You breathe through your nose to save water. You keep your feet clean because feet keep everything else possible. You count the lighthouse turns or night your eyes demand a job and thank the keeper who trims the wick. You tuck one hair from the warder's boy's pencil in your charm because charms eat small things and keep them safe. Night gives you the pier again and you take only the reading. The eddy at the piles returns to ordinary. The slack arrives sooner and leaves faster. You stand one rung down, open the hand and let water pass between your fingers without asking for more than information. Across the cut, Devil's Island wears the same black shoulder. A single lamp at the keeper's walk blinks like a reasonable man. You put the canteen back in its place tighter than before, and return by the rope walk where coils sleep like tame snakes. In the dorm, you write 3 lines you won't send and fold them into a seam that won't see the sea. Sleep comes with a hand on the shoulder, patient as a carpenter levelling his board, and you say yes without asking for terms. Hey again? No, not the cheer from our beginning, not the wink. Just you, standing in a heat that makes decisions for men, holding a tool that tells the truth, wearing a number that learned your shape. You have walked Royale and Saint-Joseph with your eyes even when your feet stayed put. You have hammered stone until it stepped into roads. You have carried sleep like contraband. You have folded letters into the pockets of a world that doesn't promise to deliver. You have learned to read a tide by hand and fever by breath. You have measured a day with a spoon. The island taught a grammar of work. Drain, stack, tie, trim, test, lay, check, lift. It taught you that mercy likes simple verbs. It taught you that names are fragile and numbers are stubborn, and both can be carved into wood that will weather at different speeds. You are not a legend, you are a person with a shovel. Now the soft part. The part that isn't a lullaby, but a street with less traffic. You're in your hammock and the net is up because you learned that lesson twice. The knot that keeps you off the floor sits where your hand can find it. The dorm air smells of canvas, rope, and the last honest inch of lime on the wall. A gecko visits the beam and inspects the moth ration. A rat thinks about becoming a problem and decides to stay philosophical. The feverman turns once and remembers he doesn't need to cough tonight. You have 3 small assets you didn't have when the boat first landed you. A spoon that fits your mouth, a rope charm that keeps your hand steady, and a word you can spell without help. Plom, weight you choose to carry. You tuck them under your breath and let your chest choose a slower tide. Outside, the sea folds its sentence against the reef and refuses to raise its voice. The lighthouse draws its disciplined circle. Far on Devil's Island, a lantern moves 5 steps and stops and moves 5 steps and stops because that is the job. You know now that the beam belongs to water, not to men. Still, it touches you, and you admit that touch. You consider, not for the first time, whether tonight is a night, and you hear the same true answer. You are good at work and there is work to finish. Someone will need a strap mended, a hinge trued, a drain reminded of the route it swore to follow. Someone will need a letter written that says nothing and means everything. Someone will need a knot that holds. You can be that knot for one more day. That counts, even on an island that eats counting. Think of the people who carried you without speeches, the warder's boy with his fish newspapers and his pencil that became a needle, the Corsican who tied a wrist knot to teach an hour to behave, the keeper who let you wipe a prism and see your ribs in rainbow for a heartbeat you did not waste, the man who taught you to splice long so rope forgets it was broken, the Breton who loved bells, the cook who argued soup into meaning with a single pepper, the barber who returned your face to you with soap and alum, the guard who left a lime on a crate like a treaty, the medic who read your pulse as if timing the sea, the man who said tide has a pause and you can step in it without sinking. You did. Now the part where you step back into your other room, the one that has its own daylight and its own clock that doesn't hang from a bell. Breathe through your nose the way you learned here. It saves water you'll never ration, and it lowers a noise you don't need. Put your hand out flat like you did on the rope. Feel the room answer with the ordinary pull of air. It is a good pull. Look at the tools you own. Pen, keys, cup, and oil them in your mind. If there is a light to trim, trim it. If there is a hinge to ease, ease it. There is a drain to clear, clear it. There is a person who needs a letter that says little and means much. Write it with your straightest hand. The island taught one big lesson in small sentences. Care is labour that repeats without applause and still matters. When you turn down your cover, hear the surf anyway. When you lift the glass, taste a clean barrel that didn't lie. When you touch the wall in the dark, feel lime that dried honest, and thank some quiet mason you will never meet. If your day had heat, let the breath you choose now travel slower. If your day had numbers that tried to become your name, put your own name back on gently, 2 hands, no hurry. If your night has a mosquito, accept that being alive attracts small collectors of taxes, and pay them with a frown, then return to sleep. If your memory wants to drag you to a gate you don't own, give it a simple job. Count the lighthouse turns, count your ribs, count the knots you know by heart, and let it rest after 5. Close the ledger, not with a slap, with a palm. You still have the spoon, you still have the rope charm, you still have plomb, you carry what you choose and you put down what you can. The island keeps its rocks and its rules and its ledger of numbers that will outlast our voices. We keep a few lines that move. Tonight you are not escaping. You are staying with a breathing room and an honest knot. You lean into the day you ended, make it square, tie it off with 2 half hitches and a quiet bow, and let the sea finish its sentence for you. The bell is far away, the net is up, the fan of the surf hums its small stubborn lullaby. Close your eyes. The work waits, patient and exact, and so does sleep.